Every now and then you get that snap picture of just how small the world really is. It's one of those times when you're halfway across the world and recognize a guy from the gym, or you spot your childhood crush ahead of you in the line at the DMV. I've moved a lot and lived a lot, and these things happen to me every now and then. So when it does happen, I don't always think much of it. Until not too long ago, I lived in a small townhouse. I worked as a shift manager at a component factory in northern Pennsylvania, not too far from Pittsburgh. It wasn't anything fancy, mostly compartments and storage for snowmobiles and tractors. Honest work, but it took quite the drive to get there. Almost 50 minutes by car one way. But I had a great place. It wasn't big space-wise, but there was a great open floor plan that made the place feel 3 times bigger than it actually was. 2 floors, 2 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, and a living room with an adjoining kitchenette. Perfect for a bachelor or a small family. The only problem was the bedroom door, which could jam if I closed it too hard. I was coming back from a bad breakup. My ex and I had been talking about moving in together, but we just couldn't make it work. She had these anxieties that kept her from really committing, and she ended up second-guessing herself to the point where I was no longer part of the conversation. After a while, we simply had to accept that she had no idea what she wanted, but she wasn't in a place to be with me either way. I accepted a transfer up north along with the promotion, and I wished her the best. I had been living up there for about a year when one morning I noticed somebody moving in across the street. It was nice not to be the newest guy on the block anymore. I only saw glimpses of the owner. There was a woman standing outside on the lawn pointing at 2 movers and trying to direct them with a voice that could barely be heard outside her own head. It was like watching someone trying to tow a car with a rubber band. By the time that I got back home that night, there was still furniture on her lawn. I decided to be the good neighbor and head over to see if she needed any help. She was doing her best to tip and angle a 3-seat couch by the time that I got there. She wasn't making it through the door on her own. I waved at her. "Excuse me," I said. "You need any help?" "Oh, it's fine," she said. Thank you, really." "You sure? It looks like you need to angle it and pull sideways. That's a rough one-man job." She rolled her eyes and let out a sigh. She nodded in quiet resignation, and less than a minute later, the couch was on its way through the living room. It's always a bit eerie to move into a new place. Everything looks so barren that you can hardly imagine it being a space where people lived and breathed and laughed. For the time being, this woman's life was all boxes and bare floors. Every step echoed off the walls. I helped her with a couple of boxes before she let her guard down. She had this short brown hair that sort of clung to her sweaty face, and these deep pockets under her eyes. I could tell she hadn't been sleeping a lot. There was a shake in her hands that showed she had either been skipping meals or was deathly nervous. After carrying in some of her kitchenware, she stopped me at the door and forced a smile. "Sorry," she said. "I'm Julie." I introduced myself, shaking her hand. She was definitely trembling. "The movers screwed you, huh?" "Yeah, they were only paid to dump it all on my lawn, it seems." "Sorry to hear that. Looks like you're almost done, though." "Yeah, but the unpacking's gonna take a couple of days. But it's nice to get settled." There was something about her voice that seemed familiar. It reminded me of my own in a way. And then it just kind of clicked. I knew this woman. Julie and I had gone to the same school. I hadn't recognized her. She used to be the tallest girl in class. And then she just sort of stopped growing, while the others kept going, making her the shortest girl in class over the course of about 2 years. Now that I thought about it, it had to be her. It was obvious. I'd had enough of a crush on her not to forget that face anytime soon. The moment I recognized her, it was like she recognized me in turn. She let out a huff and looked me up and down. "I can't believe it," she laughed. "What are the odds?" "Julie, you wanted to be a teacher, right?" "Yup," she nodded. And I am. And you had these apple earrings, I said, gesturing. They were the size of golf balls. She couldn't hold back a snort and stepped away, crossing her arms. And you went out with James, I added. Man, I haven't seen him in years. Her smile froze in place. She nodded, rubbing her shoulder in a self-hug. I noticed she had a wedding ring. Yeah, she said. Good times. She excused herself and thanked me for the help. She offered me a 20 for the trouble, but I waved it off. She insisted, but I had made my mind up. She ushered me out the door. I gotta check on Danny, she said. She's been awfully quiet. You got a kid in there. Yeah, my girl Danny, she smiled. 4 years old, she's in her room. She's had a rough day. Well, tell her I said welcome to the neighborhood and feel free to drop by sometime. I'll do that. I wandered off, only to stop halfway across the lawn. I looked back, only to see her still leaning against the doorway. You still got those apple earrings? I asked. No, she said, shaking her head. Times change. It was a dumb question, but I couldn't help myself. I waved goodbye, and that was that. I caught myself glancing out the living room window a couple of times before I headed to bed that night. I could see Julie in her window putting up decorations. A couple of framed pictures, curtains, a couple of lamps and candles. And finally, a pot housing a tall blue sunflower. Unusual. I had had a huge crush on Julie in high school. I had thought about asking her to prom, but James got there first. I ended up going with Margie H., who was more interested in using me as a dress-up doll rather than a boyfriend. There was a lot of, do this, it's cute, and oh, don't do that, it looks weird. She ended up spending most of the night with her friends across the room. James and Julie, on the other hand, only had eyes for each other, slow dancing under the disco ball to all the greatest hits of the 90s. But there seemed to be no James around anymore. Perhaps it was just like she had said. Times change. But looking back at that night, I couldn't imagine the two of them apart. Not for a moment. I tried not to bother Julie and her daughter for a couple of days. I thought about heading over to say hi someday, but I figured they needed some time to get settled. I was probably overthinking it, but I didn't want to give a bad impression right off the bat. It's one thing to be helpful, it's another thing entirely to be creepy about it. And you don't want to mess things up with somebody you're going to see across the street for years, and maybe even decades to come. I wondered about her daughter Danny. I was yet to actually see her. I had to leave for work so early that I had never seen Julie take her to daycare, and by the time that I got off work, they had already come back home. Julie wasn't letting her play in the front yard. Then again, maybe that was by design. You don't want your 4-year-old to run amok near a busy road. So I tried to keep my curious eyes to myself and focus on my own life. But after months of empty inboxes and being ghosted on apps, you start to cling to whatever light in the dark you can spot. And I couldn't help but to think that maybe a light had moved in just across the street. One day as I came home and browsed my mail, I noticed a letter addressed to Julie. She had a different last name. It took me a while to connect the dots. She had James' last name, and given how she had a wedding ring, I couldn't help but consider that maybe they were still together. Either way, I had a misplaced letter to deliver. I made my way across the road and knocked. Julie opened, holding a phone to her ear, talking to someone. I handed her the letter in silence, and she rolled her eyes apologetically at me. She wasn't in a very enthusing conversation on her phone, apparently. She mouthed "thank you" back at me. As I turned to leave, she put her phone down for a second. Hey, would you mind helping me with something? I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. I need some help with Danny's room. I'm useless with electronics. I'll give it a go, sure. Oh, thank you so much. Drop by tomorrow around 7 if you can, alright? Tomorrow, 7. Got it. She put her phone back to her ear and waved goodbye. I just stood there for a couple of seconds, trying to catch a glimpse of her through the window. But the only thing that I could see was that blue sunflower of hers. The thing was tall and it always seemed to be turned your way no matter where you looked. It was downright creepy. The next day I went over to see Julie. My heart was thumping away in my chest a little harder than usual. I was trying to keep it cool and not get my hopes up, but there's something about an old crush that just taps at your heartstrings. I knocked on the door, peeking at the window. The sunflower was still there and I could have sworn it was still turned towards me, even as I stood by the front door. And Julie opened the door with a tired smile. She had this pink blouse with white lilies and a pair of slightly too big jeans. She had some makeup on, I noticed. "Oh, just got back from work," she said. "Come on in." She had done a lot to the place. Pictures of her and James on the wall. All the carpets were out. Birthday cards on the fridge and guest towels in the downstairs bathroom. She had put in some work. "Oh, you've been busy," I said. "Is Danny doing okay?" "Oh yeah, better than me, that's for sure." I looked over the wall of framed pictures. Julie and James at the Grand Canyon. Julie and James dressed up for Halloween. Julie and James at their wedding. James' light hair was a nice contrast to Julie's dark mahogany. "I don't see any pictures of Danny." "Oh, there used to be plenty," Julie said. "These are the only ones that we could keep." "Well, sorry to hear that." I looked at Julie, who nodded her head matter-of-factly. I could tell that I had struck a nerve. She showed me upstairs and to the left. She was yet to put up any lights, so the corridor was a bit darker. There were these big yellow letters on the wall leading up to Danny's room. She must have painted them by hand. "Little Lady Sunflower," it read out loud. "Oh, I call her that all the time. The first time I said it, I had this cold, so it came out as a little, not little, and it just kind of stuck. And now that's cute." "Well, the little lady is with her aunt tonight, so she won't mind us stomping into her holy kingdom." Danny's room was as classically girly as girly things get. A well-made pink bed, pink curtains with white stripes, toys and dolls and stuffed animals, picture books with horses and nature and cute animals. It was all very neat though. Either Danny was the most organized 4-year-old in the world, or Julie had taken some time to clean up before I got there. There were a lot of little things to go through. Julie needed help running an Ethernet cable along the wall. It took some time to set it up, but it felt nice doing something with my hands. Then she had me change a couple of lights that she couldn't reach. I didn't ask her about it, but I found it strange that she wanted UV lights in her kid's bedroom. Julie brought out a couple of boxes, the final items on the agenda. Cameras. "Oh, it's just been me and Danny for a while now," she explained. "I get nervous." "Hey, you're the parent. Ain't no shame in being careful." "I'm glad you understand." She had me set up 2 cameras in the bedroom, one overlooking the hallway and one overlooking the bedroom window. I helped her set up the Wi-Fi and I showed her how to access the feed and recordings. It was simple stuff, but not very high quality. Having helped her out, she made me coffee and sat down to have a chat in the kitchen. We talked about old friends and memories, reminiscing about the times that we had talked as kids. But I could tell that she was holding something back. Every now and then, she would completely shut the conversation down, instead focusing on the cup that she cradled between her hands. Then after a sip or two, she would change the subject. Finally, I just had to ask. "I'm sorry to bring this up, but I gotta ask about James," I said. "I see him on the pictures and you're wearing the ring." Oh, she snapped her attention, shaking her head. "Oh, right, of course, I'm sorry. I thought everyone heard about the fire." I was halfway through an apology when she shushed me. "Oh, no, it's fine, really, it's been months." She told me about the fire. They had lost their home some time ago. This was the reason she didn't have that many things to put on the walls. Most of it was lost, along with James himself. "I didn't even know that he was still in the house," Julie said, trying to keep a brave face. "I thought he was in the backyard waving in the firefighters. I was out front with Danny." I'm so sorry, Julie. Feels strange to say it out loud, but that's what happened. It's gotta be tough on Danny, a poor thing. Julie put her hand on mine and took a deep breath. Thank you, she said. You've been a great help. Well, that's what old friends are for. Right, she smiled. Friends. We said our goodbyes and I watched her close the front door. I could hear her wander back upstairs. It was dark outside, only briefly interrupted by the occasional passing car. People coming and going, paying no attention to the love-struck man gawking at the widow's front door. I snapped out of it, giving it one last look before I called it a night. The blue sunflower was still there in the window. I couldn't help but to wonder, out of all the things she managed to save from that house, why did she save a houseplant? Her own husband hadn't made it out, how come the flower did? As I walked back across the street, a curious thought struck me. The camera that was angled at the window could probably see across the street. She could see me right now. Why do you need a camera for the second floor window anyway? Especially for a window that can't be opened. Wouldn't it be better to have one by the front door? Over the next few days, I met Julie a couple of times. I came over with a bottle of red wine as a late housewarming gift, and she came over with some leftovers. She made this mouth-watering sausage stroganoff that kept her stomach warm all day. She also made her own snacks, like peanuts and sunflower seeds, lightly salted and honey roasted to perfection. After a few weeks, it was rare for me to go a full day without seeing her, and yet I hadn't met her daughter. Danny was always busy with something, sleepover at a friend's house, staying with her aunt across town, and going to bed early. There was always something, and I was yet to see a picture of her. I asked Julie if she could show me her phone once, and she promised she would, but she would change the subject and forget shortly after. But it was hard to be suspicious and even harder to care. Julie was getting comfortable in that house, and it showed. There was a glow coming back to her. One day after work, there was a knock on the door, a longer one than usual, slower. Julie was standing there with one of my phone bills. The mailman had messed up again, and I reminded myself that I had to have a chat with them about it. Then again, I didn't mind the inconvenience of having Julie over every now and then. At first, I thought she was just coming over in a rush, but there was something to her demeanor that was different. She crossed her arms, but she wasn't reserved. It looked casual. "Did you enjoy the snacks I brought?" she asked. "Oh, Danny loves the roasted ones. I'm a sucker for salty stuff. What about sweets?" I thought about it, nodding as I made a mental list. "Well, it depends on the sweet." She grinned at me. "I'm kinda sweet." It didn't take much more than a wink and a giggle for us to end up kissing. We made out on the couch as I fumbled for the remote control. I couldn't get in the mood with a Judge Judy rerun going ooh and ah in the background. Finally, as we made ourselves comfortable, I could let my heart go. Julie had this wonderful lavender shampoo that filled my senses, but there was something strange about her kisses. They had an almost chemical taste to them, like a tinge of ammonia. Maybe she had a weird toothpaste. Somewhere in the awkward fumble of eager hands and skin touching skin, a whisper reached the back of my ear. "I missed you," she mumbled. "I've missed you so much." I didn't know what to make of it. I think I tried to rationalize it as her wanting to be with me for a while, or perhaps she really enjoyed her time back in high school. But then another whisper. "Oh, I've missed you, James." There was an awkward pause. We tried to laugh it off, and she shook her head, taking a deep breath. She tasted the words for a second and leaned in close. "Danny is with her grandma." I expected her to say something, excuse herself perhaps, but there was a trauma there, and we were both consenting adults. Mistakes were bound to happen. One thing would lead to another, and Julie didn't go home that night. I don't blame myself. I was lonely and stupid. Even before she had moved in across the street, Julie had always been a bit of a girl next door in my mind. In one way, this was a dream coming true. but in another way it just felt wrong. Nothing we did that night felt as true and honest as that one mistake she had whispered into my ear. "I've missed you, James." The next morning, I woke up in a daze. It felt like I had had too much to drink, but without the headache. The world felt draped in cellophane. I woke up in my room alone, and Julie was lucky she got out of the bedroom at all. I had slammed that door pretty hard and the lock was finicky. Maybe she had a knack for it. I could hear noises coming from downstairs, so I threw on some boxers and a bathrobe and I wandered into the hallway. I could hear Julie as she moved around some plates and glasses, and she was singing this tune like something from a commercial. "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy, buddy blue, won't you be a sunflower too?" It was strange. I had never heard that song before, and yet I knew the lyrics. I wandered down the stairs as Julie waved me to the table. She had made grilled cheese. I sat down by the table as she gave me a peck on the cheek. She handed me a plate and sat down next to me as cheerful as ever. "I made your favorite," she said. "I didn't know this was my favorite," I smiled back. "Haven't tried it yet." I picked it up and held it. And then something cold ran down my spine. These weren't my plates and these weren't my glasses. She had served orange juice, but I didn't have any in my fridge. This wasn't my kitchen. These weren't my windows, not my chairs, not my tablecloth, not my house. Julie looked different. My hands looked different. And as I was about to take a bite, this escalating pulse deafened me in my right ear as a radiating warmth burst through in waves. My heart was terrified long before my mind was, and as my instinct screamed at me to run, I instead turned to my right, to the third chair at the dinner table. A voice spoke to me. It cut through the cellophane of my mind. It wasn't loud, but it enveloped my ears. The vibration didn't come through sound, but through a pulsating warmth rattling my inner ear. A droning creak, more clicking than voice, like someone smacking their lips and tongue into clicking little words. "It's your favorite, Daddy." I dropped my plate. I was sitting in my kitchen alone. No Julie, no one to my right, just my dinner table across the room from my kitchenette. The clock on my wall showed that I had another 40 minutes before I had to go to work. I couldn't hear anything. It was like my ears had popped from pressure, and no matter how much I squirmed and turned, it didn't pop back. I put my finger in my ear and I felt a blockage. I turned my head to the right and scratched, only to sense this mounting pressure on my eardrum. I had to resort to using a toothpick to open my ear up. And when I did, dirt poured out of my ear canal and onto the dinner table. It was a lot. I sat there for a moment catching my breath. Julie had left a sticky note on the front door. "Had to get up for Danny," it read. "Talk soon." She had signed it with a little heart. I washed my ears, had a quick shower, and got ready for work. On my way out, I noticed the mailman. I was halfway to my car when I turned to him. "Excuse me," I said. "Can you make sure that you don't mix up our letters again?" "Mix up who?" he called back. Me and the neighbor, I keep getting hers." "I've been doing these rounds for 12 years. I ain't about to mess them up now." "Well, you did several times." He laughed, shaking his head. "I don't think I did." That whole day passed in slow motion. I had to stop a couple of times just to sit down. I'd get this pressure in my ears like I was free diving at an uncomfortable depth. Sometimes I would get these white flashes, like I was standing somewhere too bright. Little stings and burns, giving me the semblance of ticks and twitches. I forgot to bring my lunch, but one of the guys could tell that I was having a rough day. He offered me a turkey sandwich. As I went to get it from the fridge, that pressure started to build in my ear again. But this time, as it swallowed my sense, a voice came through. "Mom made your favorite." I turned to see the break room table covered in plant dirt with little green sprouts. Something bulbous moved just beneath the surface. "Mom made your favorite." I held a fistful of sunflower seeds. The sprouts on the table were growing so fast they resembled spasming tadpoles, reaching for the fluorescent lights. And the bulbous growth kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. "Mom made your favorite." My fingers cramped so bad that my nails dug into the meat of my hand. Blood mixed with the mush of a turkey sandwich between my fingers. I fell to my knees trying to force my fingers open, but it didn't work. Two guys came running trying to help me straighten my arm out. They couldn't do it without the risk of breaking my wrist, so they had to sit there with me and wait for the paramedic to come. It took a shot of muscle relaxant to get it loose. They had me scheduled for a doctor's appointment. I was sent home early that day. I hadn't taken a sick day since I had started, so they could tell that this was not normal. Things looked different driving home in the middle of the day. You never see the sun like that usually. There are different sounds, different cars on the road. It makes it all feel unreal, like a bad dream. Coming home, I went straight for bed. By the time that I woke up, it was dark outside. Walking downstairs, I noticed a letter by the door. I must have missed it. There was a post-it attached. "Oh, you didn't hear me knock. Just wanted to drop this off." I picked up the letter. Just a phone bill. Strange though, would the mailman really make that kind of mistake after I specifically reminded him? And did he do it out of spite? No, that didn't seem right. I had a curious thought. When I helped Julie set up the camera in her daughter's bedroom, she had given me access to her Wi-Fi. I had also set up the password. I had no intention of spying on her, but if one of the cameras caught the view of the mailman, I could see if he really messed up that bad, or if he had done this to mess with me. The feed reset every 48 hours or so there would be plenty of time to check. I sat down with my laptop. I had to find just the right spot at the edge of the living room, but I managed to get a weak signal of her Wi-Fi. I typed in the password connected to the camera and I rolled back the footage. I felt a bit bad about doing it, but there was no way that she would know. Sometimes we do things behind closed doors that we're not proud of. I checked the feed from earlier that day. I saw Julie leaving my house in the morning. I saw myself walking out and heading off to work, having a quick conversation with the mailman. I then saw him watch my car roll out of the driveway and walk up to my house, dropping a letter through the door. Well, that couldn't be right. I kept watching. And Julie came back to her house holding the pot with her blue sunflower. She put something into my front door and it swung wide open. She grabbed the letter, looked inside, and then entered. According to the feed, she was inside my house for over an hour. She came back out, still holding the pot with the blue sunflower. She hurried across the road and back into her house. A few minutes later, I saw her inside her daughter's bedroom still holding the plant. I could only see her in the corner of the feed caring for the plant, watering it, tending to its leaves, and then she turned on the UV lights. I fast-forwarded. Slowly, I could see the sunflower turn, not towards the sun, but towards the camera. There was a knock on the door. I shut my laptop and got up off the floor. I peeked out through the window only to see a strand of dark mahogany hair. Julie. The next second, I was opening the door. I hadn't planned on doing it, but I did. Everything looked brighter. "A long day?" I asked. I hadn't said that, not with my voice. And Julie walked through the door with a tired smile. She gave me a peck on the cheek. "Oh, I hate being a temp. Claire won't stop bugging me." She'll come around," I said. "She seems like one of the good ones." I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know anybody named Claire. We sat down by the dinner table. I don't remember making pancakes, but they were on the stove. I plated and served them with a spoon of ice cream and some raspberry jam as Julie told me about her day. She talked about going to see people this weekend, about making plans with her parents. And after dinner, she kissed me. But not like she had kissed me earlier. This was a real kiss. Like she had held back the love. "I love you," she whispered as she pressed her forehead against my shoulder. I looked up, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the kitchen window. My hair looked brighter. "James?" I gasped for air as the front door swung open. I was wearing my bathrobe and it was dark. Julie looked at me, her eyes wide. "Took you long enough," she smiled. "Did you get your letter?" "Yeah," I said. "Thanks." "No worries." "You okay? You look a little bit pale." "I don't know," I said. "I don't know what's going on." "You want me to come in? I can make you some." "No," I answered before my brain could register what I was saying. She gasped, like I had struck her. I could feel something bubbling in my chest as my heart raced. "I want to see Danny," I said. "Can I see her?" "Oh, sorry, she's at her friend's house," Julie said. "I don't think she is." And Julie's wounded expression melted into a mild amusement, like I was playing a joke on her. "I'm sorry. I don't think she's at her friend's house," I repeated. "And I don't think she's with her aunt or grandmother. And frankly, I don't think the mailman keeps messing up our letters." "What's with the tone?" she asked. "Did I do something wrong?" "Did you?" Our eyes stayed locked for a couple of seconds, and then something changed. "You want to see her? Fine, I'll go get her." She stormed off across the street. My heart sank as I watched her pick the blue sunflower from her window and head my way, cradling it in her arms. I slammed the door shut and backed away from the door. Seconds later, something metallic rattled into the lock, and the door swung open. She really was good with locks. "Here she is," Julie said, cradling the pot. "Don't you recognize her? Don't you recognize your daughter, James?" "I'm not James." "I can't believe it's taking you this long." She walked inside and slammed the door shut. She put the pot on the floor and I backed away. As I did, she started humming that tune again, that melody. "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy, buddy blue, won't you be a sunflower too?" Something ruptured in my head. My right eye went red and blind as a stream of blood poured out of my nose, burning my senses with a sting of copper. I closed my eyes only for an unnatural vision to come out of the dark. How I backed away from Julie in another place, in another house. A memory of a voice but not my own speaking from inside my mind. "It's not a child, Julie. We can't keep living like this." "But she's yours, James. Everything that stands between you and this family is you." "I want to be a father, not a gardener." Flashes of pain. Memories of tears stinging behind my eyes. Late night talks. Checking the bathroom trash to see if she was still throwing up sunflower seeds. I was back home, making my way up the stairs. Julie was downstairs, the pot was still on the floor. And then as I closed my eyes, I was somewhere else. I was a little bit taller and my reflection had a lighter complexion, brighter hair. There were pictures on the walls, pictures of James and Julie and a lot more. And in more than half of them, she's cradling her blue sunflower. "What are you going to do, James?" An echo yelled from downstairs. "Are we going to keep living like this?" "I'm not doing this." "I want more kids," she screeched back. "She needs a sister, a brother, and right now she needs a father." "It's not a child, Julie. It's a weed. I birthed her." Blinding light. An operating room. Holding Julie's sweaty hand as her nails dug into my skin. A terrified nurse falls to her knees. Her hands are covered in dirt and blood. A doctor holds what looks like a blue walnut. It fits in the palm of his hand and it has a pulse. I scream until my lungs ache, but Julie smiles. 100 nights of smashing pots and throwing that plant in the garbage, only for it to come back brighter, stronger, bigger in the morning. Every touching kiss from Julie came with that one nagging thought that she was using me to bring more of them into the world. Every whisper of venom cutting through my heart. Until one day when I stand alone in our bedroom with a lit match, it smells of gasoline. "You'll come back," Julie says from across the hall. "She'll bring you back." And I don't care. My eyes open and I'm crawling down the hall. I hear Julie walking around downstairs. "Danny had me feed you a ton of the stuff," she called from the kitchen. "I thought she'd be James by now." I looked down at the empty corridor. My legs hurt, I was warm, like an invisible fire choked the air. My hands looked different. Were they even mine? There was a sound coming from the stairs as something moved. The flower pot tipped up from the top step. The blue sunflower swayed a little. In little stretches, it came down the hall moving on its own. And from the bottom of the pot, something stirred. She had cut out the bottom of the pot, allowing something to reach out. The moonlight burned the image into my mind as I saw the pallid arm of a 4-year-old child pulling its way towards me. It came closer. As I blinked, I saw the flame spread around me as a vision of Julie looked at me from across the hall, shushing the blue sunflower like an upset child. I blinked again and the pot was closer, the sunflower just outside my bedroom door. The deep navy blue of its petals rattled with excitement as white dirt covered grub-like fingers pressed into the floor, pulling itself forward. I was burning and I was not, but I did exactly what James had done on that fateful day. Despite the fire, the pain, and the uncertainty, I kicked the door closed. It slammed shut with a bang. Something touched the knob, but it didn't budge. The lock had jammed. Something pounded on the door louder and louder, but it wouldn't budge. I blinked. "Well then go ahead and burn," Julie cried out. "Burn, James. She'll bring you back to me and it'll all start over again." I blinked. The memories sounded different in my mind. I know what she had said, but I remembered it differently, like I had heard two voices at once. "Well then go ahead and hide," Julie cried out. "Hide. She'll bring him to me no matter what you do." I had to do something drastic, but I was stuck. The window didn't open. In that burning space in my mind, I heard the windows crack and break as the pressure from the fire burned my retina shut. And in this place and time, I wrapped my hand in my bathrobe and smashed my bedroom window. 2 cracks in the glass echoed behind my ears. Without shoes or a shirt or even a plan, I tumbled out of the broken window. And in another world, a part of me still burned to the sound of Julie humming that one tune over and over and over. I landed hard. I cut my leg and foot on broken glass. I lay there watching blood pool around my ankles. The neighbor's dog was barking. They must have heard the screaming. There was something moving in my blood. Tadpoles, bean sprouts, seeds maybe. Someone called out to see if I was okay. Someone that wasn't Julie. And before I passed out, I saw her around the corner looking my way. She wouldn't have time to do anything. Her voice faded as my fingers ran cold and my vision dark. "She'll bring you back, James. If not now, then later." She turned and walked away. And as she did, her blue sunflower turned towards me for a final time. I think the blood loss saved me. It got out some of whatever poison she put in me. She set her house on fire and disappeared that night. She left most of her things behind to burn. I was stitched up and took some time off work. Weeks later, I would still get these occasional flashes whenever I sat down at the dinner table. I would see Julie sometimes. She would laugh and smile. Other times, she would have her back turned to me tending to her plant. I moved out not long after, somewhere closer to work. It's hard to pretend this didn't happen, but it's even harder to explain it to someone who doesn't believe it. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt. For a moment, I was James, and if I had been just a bit less careful, I would still be James. Maybe that's all I'd be. But a couple of weeks ago, I got something in the mail that proves I'm not out of my mind. It was an unsigned greeting card. Someone must have dropped it off by hand. "Congratulations," the colorful print read. "You're gonna be a dad." Susan Korndacki, Ray, Nelson Asada, Dice, Creamy, Meek, Asher, Talamagara, That One Woodsman, Sonic, GMD, Leon Knott, Takio Cirilla, Mina Lynn Kidder, SWAT, Damon McCory, Mark Norman, yours truly, Dino, Lennis TV, Wayward Son, Deus Ex Nihilo, Big Country Allen, Pamela Shockley, Sleepy Shroomy, Caleb Windsor, Kathy McGuire, Page Martin, Richard Friends, Shrimple the Shrimp, Happy Massacre 91, Jacob Bartlett, Miss Eldridge, Casey Long, Justin Sanjay Anthem, Lone Wolf Sam, Michelle Lee, Bradley Brewer, Agents Black, I'm a park ranger out in Nevada. There is an old abandoned mining town that's set a ways off the main road. The Park Service had claimed it a while back, but people were not encouraged to visit there. In fact, it was plainly marked with signs that said, "Off limits, no trespassing, danger." Heck, about the only thing they didn't do was build a moat around the place. Sometimes I wonder if they should. Some people need to learn to read or listen, one of the two, because it seemed like I was always chasing people out of there. They would look at me like I was crazy, but every one of them would spray gravel as they hauled it after I would tell them the story. I'm not supposed to tell the story. I've been warned many times, even threatened with much worse than the unemployment line. I guess that maybe I need to learn to listen too, because it was the best way to make sure people left and never came back. I'm tired of being told to keep my mouth shut. I'm tired that nothing's been done about it. We rangers are supposed to just go about our jobs and pretend that it never happened. Well, I believe that's the best and quickest way for it to happen again, and I never want it to happen again. It was a while ago. That's my way of saying that I forgot how long ago it was, but the memory's still fresh enough to tell. It was back when even I was unsure why the town was off limits. I had heard old wives' tales and urban legends, but no one would ever commit to anything concrete. I asked around once and was told that I was better off not knowing. The old rangers would just tell me to mind my business and to stay out of town. But something about it always intrigued me. I was never good at blindly following orders, so as often as I could, I would find some excuse to drive past it. On that day, it was a good thing I did, or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. I noticed a small mobile home parked at the edge of town. I knew that it hadn't been there the day before. I pulled up behind it and got out of my truck. I scanned the area around and didn't see anything moving that the wind wasn't blowing. I walked around the vehicle and it seemed to be in good shape. None of the tires were flat. There seemed to be no good reason for them sitting there unless they were sightseeing. I peeked in the windshield, but I couldn't see anyone, so I went to the side door and knocked. "Park ranger," I said. "Anybody in there?" The wind whistling was my only answer. I knocked again. "Park ranger, is everyone all right?" No answer. I pulled on the door latch and it opened. "Coming in," I said. "Just need to check to make sure that everyone's okay." I pulled the door open and I stepped inside. Unconsciously, I rested my hand on my sidearm. I closed the door behind me, leaving the wind outside. I looked around the camper and found plenty of food and supplies. They seemed to be well stocked up for the trip. I stepped back toward the bedroom, keeping an ear open for anything. It was eerily silent. The only thing that I could hear was the sound of my boots on the linoleum as I headed back the short hallway. It wasn't a long walk until I got there. The bedroom was clean and the bed had been made. I opened a few drawers and found clothes for a man and a woman. There was no sign of a struggle, so I went back out to the kitchen, stopped to open the bathroom door and found 2 kids' toothbrushes and toothpaste sitting on the sink. Just like the bedroom, everything seemed to be in its place. I noticed that the hand towel holder was empty. I looked on the floor to see if it had fallen, but the towel was just gone. I shrugged it off and I went back out to the kitchen. The table was still folded down into a bed, as these smaller models were known for. Scanning around, I was hard-pressed to find anything out of the ordinary, except for the fact that no one was there. I stepped outside and the sun had disappeared. It would be dark soon. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone. It was as if they had parked the camper at the edge of town and went for a walk. I stepped out of the camper and I turned to close the door. And that was when I saw it. A small red dot on the step. I leaned closer and it looked like it could be dried blood. I tried to dismiss it as nothing. People drip blood every day for simple, non-threatening reasons. Nosebleeds, small cuts, and general accidents. It could be absolutely nothing. But when you add in a missing family at the edge of an abandoned town that's supposed to be off limits, normal things don't look so normal. I didn't touch it in case it needed to be tested later for a DNA sample. And there it was. I was already starting to look at this as a crime scene. I looked down at the ground and I saw my boot prints in the dirt leading up to the camper. I also saw other tracks. There was another set of adult boot prints, a set of adult sneakers, and 2 different sets of smaller sneakers. Those were spooky but comforting. At least I knew these people were here somewhere. They hadn't just vanished from inside of the camper. No, it was the other footprints that gave me chills. They were adult-sized and it looked like there was more than one of them. But the creepy thing about them was that they were bare feet. I couldn't imagine anybody who lived in the area being stupid enough to walk around the desert in their bare feet. Aside from the different types of scorpions, you also had to worry about snakes, spiders, and lizards, just to name a few. It was becoming more likely that I would find this family dead from stupidity. I followed the barefoot tracks and they seemed to lead around the corner of the camper. In fact, they did several laps around the camper, with frequent stops where the feet were pointed toward the camper as if looking inside. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. This family had been stalked. I stepped in a wider circle so I wouldn't disturb the footprints. It became more apparent by the minute that this was a crime scene. I pulled on my radio to call on my position and request backup or police, but my radio was strangely silent. It didn't even click when I had released the talk button. The light was lit, so I knew the battery was charged, it just wasn't transmitting. The smart thing to do just then would have been to get in my truck and drive to the station to report what was happening. I took one step toward the truck, and that's when I heard the scream. It was a woman's scream, high and piercing, a scream of pain and anguish, as if her whole world had come crashing down. My fight or flight kicked in and there wasn't an ounce of flight in it. In a heartbeat, my gun was in my hand. I turned toward the town and began following the footprints. Once they were done circling the camper, they headed straight into town. Dusk had faded and taken the light with it. I pulled my flashlight off my belt and used it to guide me on my trail. There were a half dozen buildings, all in some level of decay. I was worried about stepping into one and just collapsing on top of me. That aside from the chance of meeting a scorpion or some other creature that didn't appreciate being disturbed in their territory. The wind had died down and the air was still. It was so quiet that I could hear my own footsteps. And there was something else too. I felt a vibration in the air. At the time, I thought it was just my heightened senses at the prospect of meeting up with a dangerous person who may have harmed that family. Even though everything within me was demanding that I run towards the scream that I had heard, my steps were slow and measured. I needed more input. I needed to know how many people that I was dealing with. I needed to identify threats, and I would be able to deal with this without becoming a victim myself. As I approached the first building, I had a strong feeling of being watched. Stepping on the porch made the boards creak threateningly. I didn't want this to end with a broken ankle or worse. I tested the boards before putting full weight on them and slowly approached the broken windows. I shone my light inside. I panned around slowly, finding a bunch of old boxes and general junk with the odd wooden chair and table. I was about to move on when back in the far corner, I saw a pair of eyes lit up by my flashlight. I froze. My light locked on it. The eyes seemed to be locked on the light as well. I couldn't tell what it was, but it scared the heck out of me. I suddenly thought of the movie that I had recently seen, Jurassic Park. When the actor was explaining how raptors attack, how one will draw your attention while two more sneak up on you and attack from the side. I suddenly felt very vulnerable, as if someone was sneaking up behind me. I whipped around, pointing with my gun and flashlight, my eyes darting all around, but I couldn't see anything. I shone my light back inside, but the eyes were gone. This didn't comfort me. In fact, it did the opposite. I was in a panic. I felt like I was surrounded and they were toying with me. I didn't even know who they were. I took a few deep breaths to get myself under control. I knew that panic led to bad decisions, and I couldn't afford any bad decisions out here on my own. I shone my light back toward the camper and saw a shadow dart out of the light. I knew that it was all or nothing. There was no backing out. I was being hunted, just like that family had been. I didn't know what was hunting me, but it didn't matter. Whoever or whatever, it was dangerous. Focus, I told myself. Stay on your toes, remember your training. Even though my training also said don't get yourself in a bad situation, it was already too late for that. Something was near the camper. I still had no idea if this family was dead or alive. The only things that I had to go on were mysterious footprints and a scream. It was the stuff of every horror movie ever made. I just hoped that I didn't end up as one of the victims that died a horrible death to save some stupid teenagers who had risked their own lives by blundering into something that they should have left alone. I sighed, turned my light back to the ground, and I followed the footprints. I noticed for the first time that there were other marks among them. They had been walked over and obscured, but it looked like two long lines, like somebody was being dragged. I brought my flashlight back up just in time to see a set of eyes disappear behind a building on the other side of the street. I stepped up to the next building and shone my light inside to find much the same as the first, minus the eyes. I didn't linger long before turning my light back out to the streets and the other buildings. I felt like it somehow kept them at bay, as if they would work their way closer to me if I didn't shine the light their way. I didn't know how long this would last. I continued to the next building, with a larger building looming larger at the end of the street. It looked like it was an old church. There was the rough shape of a steeple that had partially collapsed. I turned and flashed my light back to the street to keep the hunters back. When I stepped up to the window of the next building and shone my light inside, I found bones, piles of bones. Most looked like they were from smaller animals, but there were larger ones interspersed with them. I was sure that I had spotted a couple of human femurs. I tried my radio again, but it still wasn't working. The vibration in the air was getting stronger. It was oppressive, like the pressure you feel when you're underwater. The stillness in the air had magnified any sound. I could hear the footsteps of somebody behind me, but when I turned, I couldn't see anyone. I left the bone storage building and headed for the last building at the end of the street, the church. I walked up to the doors and they were very plain. 2 wooden doors, no Gothic architecture, no cross. Just a couple of wooden doors that looked like they were about to fall off their hinges. I hesitated, turned, and looked back down the street. I knew they were there, but I couldn't see them. This was where they had been hurting me all along. I held my gun and flashlight at the ready, knowing that I was in for a fight as soon as the doors had opened. I took a deep and cleansing breath, and then I shoved the doors open. I shone my light all around, my eyes darting to all the dark corners, except they weren't dark. There were candles lit all around. It was quite beautiful. It was also quite empty. There was no one there. Even empty and well lit, it gave off a creepy vibe. I mean, why do empty churches always do that? You would think that it would be the opposite. My senses went on high alert. I didn't trust it. It had to be a trap. As I continued to scan back and forth, looking for any hiding spots among the pews, I noticed that there was one person there. In the first pew, bent over so I could barely see them. I slowly made my way forward, head on a swivel as I approached the lone figure. When I was nearly there, it looked like they were barely breathing. I came around in front of the creature and I aimed my gun. She looked up at me. She was naked and her hands and mouth were bound. As soon as she saw me, she started screaming into the gag in her mouth. She was screaming so hard that her face had turned red. I reached down and slid the gag out of her mouth. "It's a trap," she screamed. I looked up and saw my worst nightmare. There were creatures, dozens of them. Each one looked vaguely human, but they were deformed. There was one that had one healthy arm and a second that was shriveled up. One had only a single leg but still managed to hop toward me. Another had no legs but used its arms to crawl on the floor. None of them had a full set of teeth, but they all had a look of hunger and rage in their eyes. They came from everywhere. Some even crawled their way down from hiding places in the ceiling, like some horrific Spider-Man. They swarmed toward the front of the church. I looked around for anywhere to go, anywhere to hide, when I locked eyes on a door that looked like it was a closet. "Come on," I said, grabbing her arm and dragging her over to the door. "No, I can't, please don't make me," she said, tugging against me. "We go in here or we die," I said, cutting the ropes around her wrists and putting my jacket over her shoulders. She reluctantly came along with me as the horde of creatures were nearly on us. "Quick," I said, opening the door and shoving her through. I slammed it shut behind me, taking out my knife and jamming it into the wooden door frame to keep it shut. I turned and nearly ran her over. She hadn't moved. She was standing there staring into the dark. I shone my flashlight in front of us and saw a rickety staircase descending into the darkness. "Please don't make me go down there," she whimpered. "We don't have a choice," I said. "They'll be through this door soon." The pounding had gotten louder. She turned toward the door and then pulled my jacket closer around her and took a deep breath. I stepped around her and led the way, shining my flashlight all around, trying to make sure that we wouldn't run into any surprises. The boards creaked menacingly with every step that I took. I couldn't see what was underneath, but I had no desire to find out the fast way. I looked back and she was still staring down. I held my hand out and she slowly took one step and then another. Her bare feet were filthy. I wondered if she was getting splinters as she took each step slowly and gingerly, as if walking on hot coals. After she had taken a few steps, I turned back to guide our way. The stairway was long and attached to an uneven stone wall. At some points, it jutted out far enough that I had to squeeze around to get to the next step. It was getting colder as we descended. I started missing my jacket, but knew that she needed it more. The spider webs weren't helping my anxiety either. I wondered if they were made by the deadly breed. I glanced back and saw that she was still working her way down the stairs. When I looked forward again, there was a creature coming up the stairs toward me. I didn't think, I just reacted. I barely had the gun even pointed until I fired. The creature fell back with shock frozen on its face and tumbled down the stairs. I instantly regretted my action, as my ears were already ringing from the gunshots in such an enclosed place. I turned around to check on her, but she was curled up in the fetal position sitting on a step, ears covered and rocking back and forth. "Hey, it's okay," I tried to say, but my voice sounded strange. I guess temporary deafness will do that. At least I hoped it was temporary. She didn't look at me. I wasn't sure if she had heard me, so I touched her shoulder and she immediately recoiled and climbed several stairs, backing away. I bent down to her. "Look, I know you're scared. I would be too. But if we're going to get out of this, we have to do it together. If I'm going to have to check on you every few steps, we'll be helpless if another one of those things attacks." "I don't want to go down there," she stammered. I looked ahead and then back at her. "We have no choice." I turned and started down the stairs again. After around a dozen steps, I turned to see that she had stood and was slowly making her way down again. I kept going until I made it to the bottom and kicked the body of the creature out of the way. I looked around, but there wasn't much to see. It was a passageway made of these same rough-cut rock walls and a dirt floor. I turned to see her make it to the last step. Her eyes were wide with fear. I could only imagine what she had already been through. She looked away as she stepped past the body. I decided to make a little conversation as we walked down the endless passageway to get her to focus on something other than our situation. "You're from the camper, aren't you?" I said. She nodded absently as she stared at the floor. "Were you going on vacation?" Another nod. I saw the kids' toothbrushes in the bathroom sink. "How many kids do you have?" Her eyes glazed over. "Two boys." "And your husband is with you?" She nodded. "Where were you headed?" "Vegas." "What made you stop here?" "The kids wanted to see the abandoned town." Tears streamed down her dirty cheeks, making lines on her face. "Would you like me to stop talking?" She nodded. We continued forward in silence. The chill of the place made me shiver, but not just because of the temperature. The thought of being attacked at any moment was more than keeping me on my toes. It was wearing on my nerves. After some distance, we came to an opening that stretched out into a full room. She stopped and stared. I was puzzled at first until I noticed the smell. It was the stench of death. I shone my light around the room. The first corner that I came to held a pile of bones. There was no denying that these ones were human. They were large and the right shape. There were even a couple of full torsos still together that hadn't deteriorated yet. In the next corner, there were 3 bodies hanging from the dirt ceiling. It looked like a man and 2 boys. They had been strung up by their arms and they were covered in blood. There were innumerable cuts and puncture wounds, but the most horrid sight were the many bites that were taken out of them. She collapsed and began to sob. I knew right away that this was her family. "I'm so sorry," I said. She looked at me with a mix of hopelessness and rage. "I tried to tell you not to come down here," she said with quiet forcefulness. "I'm sure we can find some way to." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand," she said, looking me straight in the eyes for the first time. "This is the trap." She stood up straight for the first time since I had seen her in the church, took off my jacket and tossed it behind her. She was beautiful, even though she was covered in filth. "My children need food," she said, stretching out her arm. In an instant, two deformed creatures appeared and stood beside her. She stroked the thinning hair on their heads as they cooed at her. "So, there was no woman in the camper," I said, trying to stall for time until I could come up with a plan. "Oh no, there was a woman. She was taken to the birthing house. She will give my children their own children. Against her will, of course." She looked at me with disdain. "She is a tool that we will use to survive, just like my ancestors were treated as tools to be used in the mines." I glanced around the room and saw several more creatures emerge from the shadows and advance slowly toward me. I knew that I was trapped. My mind scrambled for some plan, any plan to escape the horrors that awaited for me. I glanced at the three mangled bodies dangling from the ceiling and knew that would be my fate. I made my decision and I didn't hesitate to implement it. In a flash, I drew my pistol and I shot her in the forehead. The sound was still echoing when I started to run back to the passageway that I had come from. I hoped that the shock of seeing their mother die would give me a head start, before the horde of creatures hunted me down and tore me to shreds. Time seemed to move in slow motion. I felt like I was running underwater. Every move, every step seemed incredibly slow. I knew that they would catch me, there was no doubt in my mind. It was only a matter of time. The only thing that kept me from giving up was the sheer will to live. I swung the flashlight as I ran, making shadows jump and fly around. I arrived at the bottom of the stairs much sooner than I thought possible, and I threw myself up them two at a time, praying that I didn't trip. The horde was hot on my heels, and I could hear them getting closer. The grunts and snarls spurred me on even faster. I felt something brush against my heel and I knew that I had to act. I didn't bother to look back. I fired 2 shots into the closest one. I heard the inhuman scream and the sound of falling bodies. I risked a glance back to see them all tumbling down the stairs. I breathed a sigh of relief as I reached the door and struggled to pry my knife out of the wood. After a few agonizingly long seconds, it came free, and I dove through the door. Much to my surprise and relief, the church was empty. They must have all gone another way to trap me below. I looked over at the dozens of glowing candles and ran straight toward them, knocking over as many as I could. I ran to the far wall and did the same on my way out of the door. Once I was through, I turned back and jammed my knife into the door as though they wouldn't open. I didn't waste time celebrating my close escape. I ran down the middle of the street so that I would have a good view of anybody or anything chasing me. It didn't take long until I heard footsteps behind. They sounded more like a pack of dogs chasing me. I glanced back and sure enough, there were half a dozen deformed creatures in hot pursuit against the backdrop of the church engulfed in flame. I took some solace in the fact that at least some of the unnatural things must have burned up in the blaze. I had a stitch in my side and my leg muscles burned, but I didn't dare slow down. Even at the speed that I was running, they were catching up. I wasn't sure if I would make it to the truck before they got me. It was going to be close. I reached the truck and breathed a sigh of relief that I had unlocked it. By the time that I got the keys in the ignition and started it, they were on me. I locked the doors and slammed it into reverse as the first body flew into my windshield, shattering it. I got some momentum going as another landed on my hood and another grabbed my door handle. I swung the truck around and slammed on the brakes, sending them flying. I threw it in drive and stomped on the gas, spraying gravel. I hadn't gone more than a few yards when another freak landed in the truck bed and started pounding on the cabin roof. I could see the dents getting deeper. It would be through soon. Suddenly, the pounding stopped. I kept my eye on the road but turned to see what was happening. It smashed through my rear window, grabbing me by the neck. I swerved to try to break its grip, but to no avail. I could feel myself starting to black out. I knew that would be a death sentence. I pointed my gun out the window, but the creature grabbed it before I could aim at it. My mind raced faster than the truck that was hurtling down the dirt road at breakneck speed. I was seeing stars. I knew that it was a matter of minutes until the end, if not seconds. I squeezed the trigger. The gun went off right beside its head, missing it by a few inches. I was done. It howled in pain and fear at the sound and the heat of the round going off. Amazingly, it let go of the gun. I aimed it again and squeezed the trigger. Blood rained on me as its head snapped back and it fell into the bed of the truck with a heavy thump. I sat the gun on the seat beside me as I breathed huge gulps of air, wiping the red out of my eyes. My vision returned just in time for the turn onto the main road. The tires screeched as they bit into the asphalt on the way to the ranger station. I got there shortly after sunrise, pulled into a parking space and sat back in the seat. Exhaustion and adrenaline crash sapped my energy, and I fell asleep. I woke to the sound of someone knocking at my window. I whipped around, grabbed the gun off the seat, and swung it back around at the window. "Whoa there, son," the older ranger said, raising his hands. "What's got your panties in a bunch?" I took a deep breath, lowered the gun in the window, and then told him the whole story. The longer that I went, the more serious he became. Until the story was done, his face was made of granite. He stuck his hand in the window. "Keys," he said. I pulled the keys out of the ignition and handed them to him. "Go inside and get yourself cleaned up. I'll take care of this." I stepped out of the truck on shaky legs and walked into the ranger station, threw away my bloody uniform and took a long shower. By the time that I had finished and changed into a fresh uniform, the other ranger was back. He stepped inside the station and scanned the room until he found me. "All taken care of," he said with a crooked smile. "What do you mean?" I said. "Did you call the police?" He looked around at the handful of rangers that were milling around the room trying to make it look like they weren't listening to our conversation. "Yeah, we're not going to get the police involved in this," he said. "What? Why not?" He looked at me with an odd determination in his eyes. "So you really killed her, did ya?" he said. "Of course, it was her or me." "Most of the folks around here give that place a wide berth," he said. "There are signs all over saying no trespassing in danger. You would think that it was almost natural selection for those who ignore all the warnings. But those travelers, and then there are others who visit the place on the down low, all quiet like," he said as if he hadn't said anything. "Those folks might say you robbed them of their fun. You might even call them conjugal visits. There might even be some of those folks in this very room." I stared at him in disbelief and then looked around the room and saw every set of eyes focused on me. There wasn't a smile or even a hint of one that suggested this was a joke. He clapped his hand on my shoulder. "Why don't you head home and rest today?" he said. "You've had a long night. We'll take care of things." He ushered me toward the door, pausing before opening it. "Just remember that nothing happened," he said, "because if the police get an anonymous phone call, We might have to drive out and grab a couple of children to come visit your house in the middle of the night. You get me?" I nodded my head in a daze as he opened the door. That's the story I tell when people don't take the hint and stay away from the town. It's been years, and every once in a while I hear of travelers that disappeared in that area. I shake my head and wonder. When I saw Mr. Eckler heading towards the back of the classroom, I thought nothing of it. In the back corner stood a tiny bathroom for faculty members only. No other classrooms had bathrooms that I knew of, but I never really thought about it or cared. Mr. Eckler led the honors history class. I looked down at the essay that would count as 10% of our final grade. On the top, in 2 typewritten lines, stood the prompt, explain in detail the benefits and drawbacks of using LSD for torture. I had argued that the risk of causing mystical and spiritual experiences during torture using psychedelics seemed too high, as a mystical experience would likely strengthen the subject to interrogation. I had just finished the last paragraph, contrasting the effects of the CIA's MKUltra with the Soviet Union's use of DMT in interrogations. Sighing, I picked up the essay, looking around for Mr. Eckler and yet seeing no sign of him. Most of my classmates did not yet notice, as only a few others besides myself had already finished. I saw looks of utter concentration as they stared down intently at their paper. One kid had his nose practically touching the sheet as he wrote. I had to repress an urge to laugh at that. Each of the people in this school called the Watchtower had their own special ability. Yet to a random observer, the Watchtower would not have seemed very different, except for the fact that there were no streets, no towns, and no houses in a 200-mile radius. I sat back in my chair staring at the clock. The second hand circled around, infuriatingly slow and indifferent. The class would end in 5 minutes. Mr. Eckler had gone into the bathroom over half an hour earlier. At this point, I started to wonder if something had gone wrong. Perhaps he had fallen and hit his head. Outside the windows, heavy sheets of wet snow fell over the jagged mountain peaks surrounding the watchtower. They kept us isolated. There were no roads in or out of the area, only a single rail line guarded by armed men in black military gear. Stationed in the Arctic Circle, few people besides Eskimos would even want to live here. Our valedictorian, a fairly attractive girl with a natural tan and flowing auburn hair named Stephanie, finally rose from her seat. She was annoyingly competent at everything she did, and had gotten into classes that Ian and I had not been able to master, like telekinesis and assassination techniques. I tore my gaze away from the window, watching her intently. Pensively, Stephanie walked to the bathroom door, sending nervous glances in every direction. Nearly the entire class had finished the essay by this point, and we all watched her with open interest. I figured I would let this annoyingly competent teacher's pet take charge. "Mr. Eckler," Stephanie murmured, knocking lightly on the dull, ancient-looking wooden door a few times. Though she tried to cover it, I noticed her face quickly falling into different expressions, each only lasting a fraction of a second. Uncertainty, consternation, and finally disgust and revulsion. I wondered why the latter expressions had arisen for a few moments, until the smell passed by my spot in the middle of the classroom. I wrinkled my nose, uncertain of what had happened for a long time. My first absurd reaction was that it was some horrible cloud of constipated gas released by one of the other nearby students. Like a fine wine, I noticed different notes emerging in the fetid odor: feces, rotting meat, blood, and infection. My friend Ian, sitting at the next desk over, immediately rose to his feet yelling. He had always been somewhat of a class clown, though now his voice had a serious quality that I had rarely heard there before. "What the heck?" he said in his high-pitched, often hilarious voice. "Is that a dead body?" This caused the other students to start looking around nervously at each other. Stephanie continued knocking on the bathroom door, each series of knocks becoming faster and more insistent. "Mr. Eckler, Mr. Eckler," she yelled, putting her face right up to the door. Her inky eyes glimmered with uncertainty. "Are you okay in there?" I felt a hand grab my shoulder. I looked up to see Ian. Ian had always had a powerful sense of intuition. At times, I felt certain that he actually saw the future, as if it were a movie that he could fast forward and rewind. He stared at me with eyes the color of ice floating over muddy water. His dilated pupils looked unfocused and unsure of his thin, high-cheeked bone face. "Bro, we need to get the hell out of here," Ian whispered to me. "Something's not." But he never got to finish his sentence. At that moment, I heard a click. The bathroom door flew open. It smashed into Stephanie's body and sent her flying back, her arms and legs splayed out and grasping frantically at empty air. The door slammed into the wall with a sound like a car crash, causing the wood to crack and throw splinters in every direction. Inside the threshold, I saw a cyclone of purple light spiraling into a thick veil of fog. Mr. Eckler's voice echoed out, filled with panic. It sounded far away. As he spoke, it grew fainter, as if he were being dragged away at an incredible speed. "Where am I? Who are you? Let go of..." And then we heard him no more. I looked up nervously at Ian, who still stood over me, pulling at my arm. But his face had gone chalk white as he stared open-mouthed at the purple vortex. "I think you're right," I whispered, rising unsteadily to my feet. Side by side, we started towards the open classroom door. The hallways outside sounded as silent as death, and the lights appeared to have gone out except in our classroom. My sense of uneasiness rose with every step, but before we got to the threshold, a screaming erupted, much closer than Mr. Eckler's fading cries. I glanced back to the back of the classroom, seeing strange and monstrous creatures erupting from the spiraling vortex of fog. Scorpions with human faces and long translucent wings like those of a dragonfly flew out in a blur, rising and falling with each beat of their powerful wings. Each looked about the size of a large dog. Their hairless, childlike faces constantly morphed into bizarre expressions of hunger, shock, anger, and sadness, rapidly flicking through each like a slideshow. Their many-jointed tails curled in anticipation of fresh meat. At the end, stingers as long as syringes dripped with clear, thick venom. The teens in the back of the classroom scattered like cockroaches, forming a wave of running, stumbling bodies. 3 flying scorpions crashed into them, sending people flying over the desks and through the air in graceful arcs. I saw it happening as if it was in slow motion. The stinger of one speared through the heart of a girl, slamming her into an upside-down desk with a snapping of ribs and a splash of red. Before a second victim had even hit the floor, another scorpion had darted forward. Its wings buzzed in a frenzy as it grabbed another student out of the air. Its tail wrapped around him lovingly, almost caressingly, before the dripping stingers sunk into his flesh with a wet thud. The other 2 scorpions reached out their long, skittering legs, picking up more of my classmates as they pleaded for mercy or screamed in terror and agony. They tried to crawl away on the floors past the pile of jumble of arms and legs and turned over desks, but the scorpions didn't let them get far. "Holy crap," Ian said next to me, putting out a hand to stop me. I had been stumbling forwards without even looking where I was going, so horrified and transfixed by these scenes behind me that I couldn't bear to look away. But now I turned to look through the open threshold, seeing what Ian had already spotted. Something like a hairless dog crouched in the middle of the shadowy hallway. It had two red eyes that smoldered like cigarette burns into a mouthful of serrated and jagged teeth. Its skin looked wrinkled and thick, the color of sand. Contained within its powerful jaws, I saw a human arm, the elbow bent and the fingers extended, as if reaching out for help. A sharp piece of broken bone protruded from the mutilated patches of red dripping at the end. The pain shrieking of my classmates rang out from the back. I heard the wails of the dying. The hairless creature slowly drew forward, dropping the arm onto the floor with a wet thud. It started growling, a rising current of rumbling sound that vibrated from its barrel chest. Creeping forward on sharp, curving claws the color of ivory, it looked ready to pounce at any second. I heard its claws clicking with every step. I thought that Ian and I would die right then and there, ripped apart by this hellish abomination with its red eyes and bared teeth, jutting out like railroad spikes. I took careful steps back, hearing the whirring of wings drawing closer with each thudding heartbeat. But I was afraid to look away from the hairless wolf creature, anxious that breaking eye contact would cause it to leap for my throat. With a sudden battle cry, Stephanie ran past me, holding the classroom's flagpole in one hand. The American flag streaked past, fluttering wildly as she speared the sharp end of the metal pole into one of the creature's burning red eyes. It shrieked in a voice like grinding glass, retreating back into the dark hallway in a flash. "Come on," Stephanie cried, grabbing my arm. I saw blood trickling from a deep gash on her forehead, and one side of her face looked bruised and swollen. I glanced back, seeing most of my classmates laying on the floor, their frozen faces stuck in the rictus grimace of the dead. The sputtering of nerves shook my body as I saw the wide, sightless eyes staring up into eternity. Two of the scorpions soared through the air in falling and rising currents, headed straight at us. I saw their strange, childlike faces twisted into pained grimaces. Together, Ian, Stephanie, and I ran out of that classroom of horrors, slamming the door shut moments before a flying scorpion smashed into the other side. Across the hallway stood the telekinetics laboratory. I knew that it held a variety of potentially useful items, including knives, but the door was closed and dark. I looked through the glass pane, but I could see nothing inside. From further down the shadowy hallway, I heard the creeping of many feet. Without hesitation, I gently pulled the door open, wincing as a rusted creaking rang out. I quickly ushered Ian and Stephanie inside, afraid that something had hurt us. As quietly as possible, I closed the door behind us. My eyes adjusted rapidly to the darkness. I realized we were not alone. The bodies of a dozen students lay twisted and broken on the floor. The smell of death rose, thick and rank. Blinking quickly, I looked around for something useful, something that might help us survive. In telekinetics class, students had to juggle knives, bend spoons, stop crossbow bolts from hitting their targets, and all with the power of their minds. Of course, some students had no telekinetic ability at all, including myself and Ian, and we were rapidly withdrawn from the class. Stephanie was one of the few remaining students from our year who had what the teacher called natural potential. The class had 8 tables, each set up with 4 chairs and a sink. Cuts and injuries were common, especially during final exams which were finishing tomorrow. After all, this insanity had begun during our final exam in Mr. Eckler's room. "I'm getting something right now, man," Ian said nervously, his eyes flickering back and forth rapidly. "We're not alone. Something bad." His voice trailed off in terror. In the dim light streaming through the tiny barred windows overhead, I saw Ian's pupils dilating and constricting rapidly, dozens of times each second. I knew that his precognition had activated. His head ratcheted to face the corner suddenly. I followed his line of sight, seeing something moving. Behind the blacktop tables, a little girl in a faded green nightgown huddled in the corner. Black hair covered her face. The front of her gown looked soaked and matted with fresh blood, as well as drippings of darker and thicker fluids. More crimson droplets fell from her chin with every passing heartbeat. She slowly started rising to her full height, her feet cracking and dripping with deep purple sores and infected slices. "My pets," she hissed in a low voice. It seemed amplified and unnatural. She giggled, but her laughter gurgled as if she had a cut throat hidden under all that hair. I glanced nervously over at Stephanie, who had slowly started backpedaling towards the cabinets against the side wall. I hoped she had a plan because I certainly didn't. "Your pets?" I asked in a trembling voice. "You mean those things roaming the hallways and classrooms?" The little girl nodded eagerly, her greasy matted hair still hiding what lay underneath. "The door opens sometimes, the pathway between worlds. It is the selection of the strong. The weak deserve to die, and how painfully they go. It brings joy to my heart to see their blue lips and slashed throats." She laughed again, a revolting sound that made my heart palpitate in my chest. "It's a trap," Ian whispered furtively in my ear. "Watch the door, they're going to try to." But he never got to finish his thought, because at that moment, many things happened at once. The classroom door flew open so hard that when it hit the wall, the shatterproof glass pane cracked down the middle. Slinking through the threshold, I saw two hairless hellhounds. One of them had an eye missing. The fiery socket constantly dribbled rivulets of blood down its demonic face. It glared up at Stephanie with a vengeance. I jumped, feeling Ian grab my arm and push me towards the far wall, where Stephanie stood in front of an open cabinet. Her long and slender fingers reached through these supplies with precision. A moment later, she withdrew her fists, and in each one I saw a long butcher's knife, the steel tips razor sharp and gleaming. Without speaking, she flung the two knives straight up into the air. They spun in slow, lazy circles, looking like they would simply fall back down and land in Stephanie's open hands. But a moment later, her arms shot out in a blur. Sparks of blue sizzled off her skin. They spiraled down her wrists, exploding from the tips of her fingertips as the current connected with the knives. Like rockets, they shot out in different directions, these sharp blades pointing at their victims. The little girl's laughter got cut off abruptly as the knife disappeared in her thick mat of hair with a loud crunch of bone. Furiously, she reached up, the hand still quivering. The blade embedded deeply in the center of her skull. Her hair separated, revealing the horror show hiding underneath. A skinned and eyeless face stared out. The muscles appeared rotted and gray, almost falling off the bone. The exposed facial muscles constantly twitched and contracted in random movements. As she pulled at the knife, more pieces fell off, revealing the grinning skull and broken blackened teeth underneath. The other knife soared through the air and into the wrinkled and sloping forehead of the nearer of the hellhounds. It gave a strangled, low cry and fell on its side, its legs still pumping the air furiously. The other one kept creeping closer, staying near to the ground. Its one red eye shone with light, while the other dribbled black blood and stains from the empty socket. The little girl's bloody hands threw the knife across the room. I saw it soaring toward me, a blur of flashing silver and black. A moment later, it bit into my leg with a numbing and burning sensation. For a few heartbeats, I felt nothing but cold pins and needles radiating out in a circle. From the corner of my eye, I glimpsed the hellhound leaping up on powerful legs. In a streak of beige, it missed me by inches, landing on Stephanie's chest with its crooked claws. A surging agony of pain ran up my leg. I stumbled, landing hard on my chest as the breath whooshed out of my bruised chest. Next to me, Stephanie fell backwards, a strangled scream dying in her throat. The hellhound's claws bit through her skin with an explosion of blood. Stephanie twisted and writhed beneath the gnashing teeth, her tan skin rapidly covered in spatters of crimson. Her telekinetic abilities exploded with a flash like blue lightning. Dozens of chairs laying strewn and broken across the room rose, smashing straight up into the ceiling with an ear-splitting shudder. Another bolt of Stephanie's energy hit the hellhound. It flew up in a blur, its one remaining red eye furious and wide. It hit the ceiling with a wet crack of bone. The tiles shattered, blowing apart into an expanding orb of dust. The destruction spread, widening as hidden wires and vents collapsed. Within moments, the cloud of falling debris had grown thick and impenetrable. I heard Stephanie's wet gurgling nearby, but I could see nothing. Her attack on the ceiling had caused the entire room to start caving in. I dragged myself forward over the debris, my spurting leg rapidly covering my jeans in warm and slick scarlet. Every breath felt like agony. Every twitch in my right leg brought a wave of pain so intense that I nearly passed out. A hand fell on my shoulder. I spun around on my back, nearly screaming, but I immediately started choking on the dust. "It's me," Ian whispered in a small voice, leaning down. Through the cloud of debris, I could just barely make out his silhouette. "Follow me." He wrapped his arms around me, helping me to my feet. After putting an arm around my back, we staggered forward together as if we were in a three-legged race. We stumbled in the direction of the door, trying to get away from the insane little girl and her pets. Behind us, Stephanie's death rattle rang out, weakened with every bloody breath. By the time that we made it to the door, she had gone silent. In the dark hallway, I saw long trails of drying blood, but no signs of any people or cryptids. The few windows opening up onto the Alaskan mountains allowed some of the snowy light to enter, but the shadows seemed so unnaturally thick and persistent, leaving only a world of silhouettes and dim horrors. I heard no sign of the demonic girl. In the room that we had just left, nothing seemed to stir. A powerful sense of hope gripped me then. Perhaps we had killed her. "You need medical attention," Ian murmured. I looked down at my leg, seeing the knife's handle still sticking out like the quill of a porcupine. It had landed in the fleshy part of my thigh, missing the bone by a hair's width. "Why don't you use your ability?" I stared at him in horror. "No freaking way," I said quietly. "When I change, I can't control it. I might kill you and everybody left alive. There's no human thought left when that happens, and I can't control how long I stay like that either. I could be gone for days or weeks." "Well, you might not have a choice," he said. "At this point, I don't think there are a lot of people left alive, and the chances of us both making it out are tiny. If you changed, the wound in your leg wouldn't affect you nearly as much." I knew that he was right in that. If I changed, the wound would probably affect me not at all in truth, but the endless, maddening waves of hunger would. "No, screw that," I said. "We need to find help. What's your intuition saying?" I hoped that Ian's precognitive talents would allow him to see the right path forward. "Maybe if we make it to the train, we can alert the guards." "You act like they don't already know what's happening," he said. "Well, they probably do, but they just don't care. Why else would they build the school in the middle of a mountainous wasteland?" "To keep us as prisoners," I answered. He laughed. "I think there's something else in here they want to keep imprisoned far more than us." He looked both ways down the hallway, unsure of what to do. I stared intently at the closed door to Mr. Eckler's classroom. The power in the room had apparently gone out. It sounded as quiet as a corpse in there. I wondered what had happened to the flying scorpions. The door suddenly flew open. I screamed, nearly falling on my bad leg. Ian gave a gasp like a strangled cat, his arm tightening around my back. Through the dim, snowy light entering through the windows, I saw Mr. Eckler. His button-up shirt and slacks looked absolutely shredded, revealing deep slices dribbling blood down his chest and legs. One of the lenses of his black glasses had shattered, and the other had fallen out entirely. He stared blankly at us, his normally jovial, rounded face a mask of horror and trauma. Behind him lay the broken bodies of students. I also saw one of the flying scorpions laying upside down, its once beige exoskeleton now cracked and blackened, as if it had been roasted over a bonfire. "Oh, thank God," Mr. Eckler whispered upon seeing us. "I thought that everybody else had already died. Jesus, what a mess." He shook his head slowly, his pale face matted and covered in sweat. "Mr. Eckler?" Ian mumbled nervously. "We thought that you were dead. What happened?" Mr. Eckler gave a long and weary sigh. "I really don't know, Ian," he said. "One moment I was in the bathroom and everything seemed normal. The next moment, however, the back wall started moving away from me. Within a few seconds, the bathroom had expanded to something the size of a football stadium. The lights had darkened and strobed until everything turned purple, and mist started to flow out of the walls until I couldn't see. I had no idea where I was or even which direction to go, but that was far from the worst of it. The next thing that I remember, something in the mist had grabbed me. At first, I couldn't see, but I felt its teeth in my arm. He raised his right wrist, where deep bite marks gleamed on the pale skin. More of these things came. They looked like hairless dogs. One of them jumped on me and got me down to the ground before I could react. It slashed me over and over until I was forced to use my ability. Mr. Eckler had never told us about his ability, though I knew that all teachers at the watchtower had one. I looked at the burnt body of the scorpion. "You burned them?" I asked. He nodded. "I can create fire, yes," he said. "Pyrokinesis, they call it. An extremely dangerous talent, I must admit. When I was a boy, I accidentally burned down my whole house trying to clear imaginary monsters from under my bed. Of course, there were no monsters, but I accidentally killed both my parents. The government found out about what happened and took me here back when the watchtower was first being built. Can you help us get to safety? Sully got stabbed in the leg," Ian said, motioning to me with a subtle nod of his head. Yes, of course," Mr. Eckler said, nodding brusquely. "Forgive my rudeness, we need to get you two evacuated immediately." He looked right and left down the hallway, his pale eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. But everything looked dead and silent now. I wondered if it was a trap. After a few moments of hesitation, Mr. Eckler went left, towards the train station and away from the medical supply room. Every step made the pain in my legs shriek with the sizzling of nerves and fresh streams of red. I felt lightheaded and weak, and I knew that if I lost much more blood, I would probably pass out. Ian watched me closely as we followed Mr. Eckler through these shadowy hallways. He strode slowly forward in front of us, a dark silhouette like the angel of death. "I have a bad feeling about this," Ian whispered. "I can't see why, but it's like something is squeezing my heart. I don't know if I'm just scared or if it's a premonition. I can't see beyond the dread." The bodies of dozens of students and more hellhounds and flying scorpions littered every part of the school. Every classroom that we passed seemed like a nightmare of broken bodies. I couldn't wait to get out of the watchtower. I wanted to leave this place forever. We descended the stairs and found the door leading to the train station wide open. Thick, wet snowflakes blew in through the threshold, accompanied by strong winds and freezing blasts of cold. Two men in black military gear lay dead outside, their hands reaching out toward the doorway even in death. The snow had begun covering their corpses by this point, but peeking out under the white covering, I saw the silhouette of a black rifle. "Oh no," Mr. Eckler said, putting his hand over his mouth. "How are we going to get out of here now?" I had no answer to that. Ian looked nervously past the dead bodies at the sleek train looming overhead, its black surface shining and covered in fresh drifts of snow. "We have to figure out how to operate the train," I said. "It's the only way that I can see to get us all out of here. Even if we could reach the outside world, nobody could send a helicopter or a plane in this." Mr. Eckler looked pensive and thoughtful for a long moment and then nodded. "Stay close by my sides then," he said, heading outside. Nervously, Ian and I followed closely behind. Ian and I hadn't taken more than a couple of steps outside when I felt his grip abruptly release, sending me tumbling into the thick blanket of snow underfoot. A surprised shriek rang out, muffled and carried off by the roaring winds. I looked up, seeing Ian stumbling blindly forwards, the hilt of a large meat cleaver emerging from the side of his neck. The red spurted straight out from his jugular, shooting forward like water from a squirt gun. He clawed at the hilt, both of his hands wrapping around it before he fell forward. His pupils dilated, his eyes glassy and filled with horror. The white snow turned to crimson underneath them. Behind him, the little girl with the black hair stood. The wind whipped her hair back, showing a face like a skull. Her insane, rictus grin was marred by large ragged tears, caused by the knife that Stephanie had used, but the girl had apparently pulled it out. Pieces of gray flesh hung down from her skinned cheeks and rotted sinus cavities. "Are these the last of the sacrifices?" the girl gurgled, turning to look at Mr. Eckler. He nodded grimly, glancing down at me one last time. "All of the students are dead, my queen," he said. "And you will be rewarded greatly for your service. Their abilities flow through their blood like sand carried away by water. And once you have ascended, you will be able to absorb their powers like me." I started crawling away through the freezing snow. The demon girl and Mr. Eckler continued talking, whispering in low voices. A moment later, the girl kneeled down over Ian's body and drank from the still spurting wound on his neck. Her lipless mouth sucked greedily, her blackened and cracked teeth gnashing hungrily. I felt a strong hand grab me by the back of the neck, lifting my head up. I stared up into the insane blue eyes of Mr. Eckler. "I wish I could say I was sorry about this, but truthfully, I'm not," he hissed, his voice changing from the teacher that I had once known into something rambling and unhinged. "I will live forever, and for that a price must be paid." At that moment, I knew that I had nothing left to lose. "Kill him now," the girl cried from behind us. "This boy can glimpse the future, and with his blood in me, I can see too. That one needs to die now. Now!" Mr. Eckler's eyes widened, his hands growing hot with flame as I completely let go within my mind. The reptilian blood laying hidden within me had erupted, and then all human thoughts had disappeared. My skin rippled and distorted, turning black and shiny like that of a snake's. Long claws ripped their way out of my fingers and toes, shredding my shoes to ribbons in a heartbeat. Mr. Eckler's burning hands stayed firmly wrapped around my neck, but they had no effect on the thick reptilian exoskeleton. Dozens of fangs grew from my gums. My sense of smell grew exponentially. With every flick of my long tongue, I could taste the air, even able to notice the odor of rotting bodies far back in the building. With the pain in my leg temporarily gone, I flew to my feet, slashing and biting furiously at the air. I felt my scales growing hot as Mr. Eckler hung on with his life. The black scales started dripping, running like oil down my tail and lizard-like body. He tried to pull back as my claws connected with his arm, ripping it open down to the bone. but I lunged forward and grabbed him by the neck with my teeth. I tasted the explosion of salty blood as it filled my mouth. In my reptilian state, it tasted sweet and powerful. The girl used her abilities to lift up the body of one of the dead soldiers. With a discharge of blue lightning from her hands, the body flew across the air in a blur, slamming hard into the side of my head. I went flying into the concrete wall of the school, cracking the cement as I hit it. Clawing blindly at the air, I pushed myself back to my feet and sprinted at the girl. Something like a blue lightning bolt flew from her body, causing the ground at my feet to open up with a deep and black fissure. At the same instant, I leapt, feeling the earth and snow crumbling beneath my feet. I soared through the air. The girl's eyeless sockets spun with darkness and sickness. I crashed into her body, instantly driving my claws into her small chest and ripping up. She gurgled, trying to crawl out from under me, but I opened my wide reptilian mouth, and I closed my sharp fangs around her neck. She gave one final hiss as I ripped out her throat. Still twitching and kicking, I continued biting and shredding until her small head was off her body. With pieces of the spine poking out at the bottom, I left it there, loping off into the snowy wastelands of Alaska. I don't know how long I traveled or how far. In my animal state, time felt fluid and strange. I remember sprinting over high, jagged mountains and thick evergreen woodlands, hunting and killing as I went. Alaska had plenty of game for a natural predator like myself, and even the polar bears and moose avoided me once they smelled the predatory reptilian pheromones of my transformed state. But I always felt hungry even after I had just tasted fresh meat. Weeks later, I finally transformed back. I found myself in a cold and dark cabin. Next to me lay the body of a hunter that I had eaten. I barely remembered doing it. Everything blurred together, and the different tastes of deer, bear, or human meat barely registered in my brain. Sickened by what I had done, I went around the cabin taking thick clothes and new shoes from the dead hunter. I went outside, and to my immense relief, I found a small town only a few miles away. From there, I made my way back to the mainland, always blending in with the crowds. I still stay on the run. The government sent me to that hall of death in the first place after all, and for all I know, they think that I died there. And if so, I have no desire to change that belief. The call came on a Wednesday morning while I was debugging code in my cramped Seattle apartment. Uncle Edward was dead. Heart attack, the lawyer said, though his voice carried an odd hesitation that made me wonder if there was more to the story. I hadn't been back to the farm in 14 years, not since the day I left for college, promising myself that I would never return to those 45 acres of Kentucky soil that had swallowed up so many of my family. But here I was, 32 years old, driving my rental car down the long gravel road that led to my inheritance. The locals in town had given me the same looks I remembered from childhood, a mixture of pity and fear. Mrs. Brownwin at the general store had clutched her cross necklace when I told her where I was headed. "Your uncle was a good man," she had said, and then added in a whisper, "He knew how to keep things proper." The farm looked exactly as I remembered it. The two-story farmhouse, white paint peeling like dead skin, stood surrounded by fields that stretched to the dark tree line. The red barn loomed against the October sky, and the old scarecrow still stood sentinel in the cornfield, though the corn had long since been harvested. It was the gate that made me pause. The main gate, made of iron and wood with its familiar cedar post. Carved deep into the wood, darkened with age but still clearly readable, were the rules. Never harvest under a new moon, and keep iron horseshoes above every door. If you hear your name called from the woods, count to 10 before answering. Never follow the deer with white eyes. The root cellar door must remain locked between sunset and sunrise. My hands shook as I traced the carved letters. Uncle Edward had made me memorize these rules when I was 7 years old, right after my parents had died in the car accident and I came to live with them. He had never explained why they existed, only that breaking them was not a good idea. The house smelled of dust and old wood. Everything was as Edward had left it. Dishes in the sink, mail on the table, his reading glasses folded on top of a farming magazine. The horseshoes were all in place above the doorways, thick with rust but solidly nailed into the wall. In the living room, family photos covered the mantel. My parents on their wedding day, my grandfather standing proudly beside his tractor. Ancestors that I had never met staring out from portraits with eyes that seemed to follow me. While searching around the house, I stumbled upon Edward's notebook in his bedroom, leather-bound and pretty beat up. The first entry was dated 40 years ago when he had taken over the farm from my grandfather. I settled into his armchair as the sun began to set, reading by lamplight. October 15th, 1983. Daddy's gone. Found him in the north field this morning, just like he said I would. He prepared me well. The rules held last night, though something tested the root cellar door near dawn. The scratching lasted for hours. I've checked the lock twice. It holds. October 20th, 1983. The deer came again today. 3 of them this time standing at the edge of the woods. Their eyes were white as milk and just watching. I did as Daddy taught me, looked away and went about my business. They were gone when I looked back, but their tracks led into the forest in a perfect line. No deer walks like that. My blood turned to ice. I remembered those deer from my childhood standing at the tree line, their white eyes reflecting light that wasn't even there. Edward had always steered me away from them, distracting me with chores or stories. The journal entries grew more disturbing as I read on. October 25th. Heard humming outside the barn again. No one's there. 3rd night in a row. October 27th. I saw it in the cornfield. Tall, thin, wrong. Bent at the middle like it had too many joints. It didn't move right. It didn't move at all until I blinked. November 7th. The animals were all facing the same direction this morning. East, dead silent. It was like they weren't even breathing. November 21st. I followed the trail back behind the barn. I found all the cats dead. Not torn up, just wrong. Every bone was broken like they had been twisted from the inside out. November 24th. Heard voices in the well behind the shed. Children's voices, laughing and then screaming. Then silence. The bucket came up wet. Smelled like rot. December 1st. Something's under the house. I hear it dragging itself across the beams at night. The dogs won't go near the porch. I saw handprints in the dust down there. Too many fingers. Too long. A sound made me jump up from the journal. My name carried on the wind. Thomas. It came from outside, from the direction of the woods. I stood, hard hammering, and I peered through the window. The tree line was a black wall against the darkening sky. Thomas, come home. The voice seemed familiar, but it was wrong, like a recording played at the wrong speed. It took me a moment to realize why it made my skin crawl. It sounded like my mom. I made sure to remember the rule. I counted to 10 before answering. I counted slowly too, forcing each number through dry lips. 1, 2, 3. The voice called again, more insistent. 4, 5, 6. It multiplied, coming from different directions now. 7, 8, 9. My mother, my father, Uncle Edward, all calling me. 10. I opened my mouth to answer, but the voices cut off abruptly, as if somebody had thrown a switch. The silence that followed was complete. No insects, no wind, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with silver hair, seemed surprised when I asked about property records for the farm. "Oh, not many folks ask about that place," she said, leading me to a dusty back room filled with filing cabinets. "Your uncle was the only Hartley that I met. Kept to himself mostly. But he'd come in every few years checking the same records that you're asking for." The papers told a dark story. The land had been in my family since 1842, when Josiah Hartley had claimed it. And since then, every generation of Hartleys had died on that land except for those who left young. My great-great-grandfather at 67, found in the barn with his hair turned white overnight. My great-grandfather at 54, discovered in the root cellar with claw marks on the inside of the door. My grandfather at 71, peacefully in the north field, as if he had simply laid down to rest. And now Edward, heart attack at 63, found by a delivery driver who had become concerned when he hadn't collected his mail in 3 days. "There's something else too," the clerk said, producing a manila envelope. "Your uncle left this, said to give it to any Hartley who came looking after he was gone." Inside was a single sheet of paper in Edward's careful handwriting. "The land chooses its keeper. If you're reading this, it's already begun to call to you. Something evil lurks on our farm, and the rules are there to keep it in its place. As long as the rules hold, it stays dormant. But as of recent, it's been growing restless. There's a reason that only one Hartley tends the land at a time. The land can only bind one keeper. Choose quickly, stay and accept your duty, or run and never look back. But know this, once the land knows you, truly knows you, leaving becomes impossible." I spent the rest of the day in that dusty room, reading about disappearances in the area, failed harvests on neighboring farms while the Hartley land flourished, and other unexplained phenomena that the locals refused to touch on. One article from 1962 caught my attention. Local farm's root cellar sealed after worker disappears. The worker, a hired hand named William Garrett, had opened the cellar after sunset. They found him 3 days later in the middle of town, aged beyond recognition. He had lost the ability to form sentences, almost as if he was a toddler again. Garrett. I knew that name. Ruth Garrett, the old woman who lived on the neighboring property. Her son. I needed to talk to her. Ruth Garrett's house sat 3 miles from the Hartley farm, a small, neat cottage with a vegetable garden that put my uncles to shame. She answered the door before I could even knock, as if she had been expecting me. "You have that Hartley look," she said, studying my face. "Same eyes as your uncle. Same burden, too, I expect." She invited me in for tea, moving slowly but purposefully. Her living room was filled with the kind of knickknacks accumulated over a long life. But what caught my attention were the horseshoes. Not just on the doors though, but on the walls. I shouldn't have to explain these to you. I think you're familiar enough with them. So you knew my uncle well. Edward was a good man, lonely but good. He understood the weight of what he carried. She poured the tea with steady hands. He told me that you left for college, swore never to come back. Yet here you are. And the lawyer said it was a heart attack. Ruth's laugh was bitter. Hearts can attack for many reasons, Mr. Hartley. Sometimes the burden just gets too heavy to carry alone. What happened to your son? Her face darkened. Oh, Billy. He was always too curious. He worked harvest for your grandfather back in '62. One night, there was a new moon, darkest night of the year. Your grandfather warned him, told him not to work. But Billy thought it was just an old superstition. He harvested the potatoes by lantern light. She sipped her tea, gathering strength to continue. The screaming, it started around midnight. By the time that they found him in the field, he had aged 20 years and 3 hours. His hair was white as snow, his hands gnarled like an old man's. And the things that he said. She shuddered. At first, it was incomprehensible, kind of a babble, but then he said the most confusing and twisted things. He spoke of the darkness between the stars, of things sleeping on this land that had been here for centuries. The doctors called it a psychotic break, but I knew better. The land had shown him something that his mind couldn't accept. But he survived it all. Oh, if you can call it that. He's in the state hospital now. Has been for the last 60 years. He's still young in his mind. Still screaming about the roots that go down forever and the mouths that wait beneath. I set down my teacup, my hand shaking. Mrs. Garrett, what is really on that land? She was quiet for a long moment. Oh, your family knows more than mine, Mr. Hartley. But I'll tell you what my grandmother told me. And before the settlers came, the people that lived here before us, they avoided it. They said that something fell from the sky there long before memory, and it burrowed itself deep. The earth swallowed it, but it didn't die. It waited. When Josiah Hartley claimed that land, he made a bargain. He and his bloodline would tend the earth above it and keep it sleeping, and in return, the land would prosper. Is that where the rules come in? And that's what keeps everything in place. They are the chains that bind. Your family learned what appeased it and what kept it quiet. She leaned forward. But chains rust, and things slip through the cracks. What will you do when the rules aren't enough anymore? I didn't have an answer. When I returned to the farm, the sun was already low on the horizon. As I parked by the house, I noticed movement near the tree line. 3 deer stood at the edge of the woods, watching me. Their eyes were white as milk, just as the journal described. They stood perfectly still, not grazing, not moving, just watching. I forced myself to look away, to walk normally to the house. And when I glanced back, they were gone, but I could see their tracks in the soft earth. Ruth was right. They led into the forest in a perfect, unnaturally straight line. That night, I made sure that every horseshoe was secure and I double-checked that the root cellar door was locked. The padlock was ancient but solid, and I noticed that additional locks had been added to it over the years. Whatever was down there, my family had not taken any chances. I settled in to read more of Edward's journal. December 21st, 1995. Things always seem to act up during the winter solstice. Something about the longest night of the year just makes everything go crazy. I've reinforced the root cellar door with iron bands, and I said the old words that Daddy taught me. And they're not in English, it's in some language that I don't know. But they work. God help me, they work. January 3rd, 1996. I found tracks in the snow this morning. Started at the root cellar door and circled the house 3 times before disappearing. Not animal tracks, not human either. The snow was melted around them, as if whatever made them burned too hot for this world. A sound interrupted my reading, a gentle creaking from somewhere in the house. I held my breath, listening. It came again, rhythmic and deliberate. The rocking chair in the spare bedroom, the one that had been my mother's when she was young. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way upstairs. The door to the spare room was ajar, though I was certain that I had closed it earlier. I pushed it open. The chair was rocking, slow and steady. But what made my blood freeze wasn't the movement. It was the muddy footprints leading from the window to the chair. Footprints that looked to be human, but they were wrong. The toes were extended too long, ending in points instead of curves. I checked the window. Locked. The horseshoe above it remained in place. That's when I noticed the footprints didn't lead back to the window. They just stopped at the chair. I backed out of the room and spent the night in the kitchen, every light in the house blazing, clutching a fireplace poker like a weapon against something that I couldn't name. When the morning came, it brought a decision. I couldn't leave, and I understood that now. The land had already begun to know me, just as Edward's letter had warned. But I could learn. I could understand what my family had really been doing here all these years. I started with the barn. If Edward had been feeding something in the woods, there would have to be evidence of it. The barn was exactly as I had remembered. Tools hung up in their proper places, hay bales stacked in the loft, the old tractor parked in its bay. But in the back corner, something stuck out to me. A ledger sat on a workbench documenting Edward's deliveries. October 1st, monthly check-in at the Split Oak. October 8th, walk the northern boundary and look for any damage. October 15th, offerings left at rock pile. October 22nd, root cellar seals checked and reinforced. October 29th, final harvest before new moon. The Split Oak. I knew that tree. A massive oak in the western woods that had been split by lightning but somehow continued to grow. Its trunk opened like a wound. As children, we had been forbidden to go near it. The walk to the Split Oak took 20 minutes. The forest was unnaturally quiet. The trees seemed to press in closer the deeper that I went, until I reached a small opening. The Split Oak dominated the space. It was even more massive than I had remembered it. Its split trunk created an opening large enough to walk through, the interior black with char from the long-ago lightning strike. Around its base, I could see that something was left there. Small bundles wrapped in cloth, some fresh, others weathered with age. I knelt to examine one. Inside was a photograph, a lock of hair, and what looked like a small bone. The photograph showed a young man I didn't recognize, but the date on the back was recent, just last month. There were dozens of these bundles, maybe hundreds, pressed into the earth around the tree's roots. A twig snapped behind me. I turned to see the white-eyed deer. Not 3 this time, but dozens. They emerged from between the trees surrounding the clearing, their milk-white eyes fixed on me. They stood on their hind legs. No, that wasn't right. They weren't standing, they were changing. Their bodies elongated, their front legs stretching into something like arms, and their faces. God, their faces were melting and reforming into something that was almost human, but fundamentally wrong. I wanted to run, but Edward's words echoed in my mind. Never show fear, never run. The land is always testing you. The creatures, I couldn't think of them as deer anymore. They watched but didn't cross into the clearing. When I finished my check, they shifted again, melting back into deer shape, and they disappeared into the forest as silently as they had come. I left my own offering at the tree. A photo of Edward from his wallet, a cutting of my own hair, and following some instinct I didn't understand, 3 drops of blood from a cut on my palm. The earth absorbed them greedily, and for a moment I could have sworn that I heard something vast shift beneath my feet. The next few days fell into a routine. I tended the farm during the daylight, and at night I barricaded myself in the house, listening to the sounds that went about the farm. The scratching from the root cellar grew louder each night too. On the 4th night, I broke a rule. It wasn't intentional. I had been checking the chicken coop, making sure the birds were secure for the night, when I realized that the sun had already set. The root cellar door was still locked, but I was outside after dark. I booked it back to the house, and that's when I saw it. The scarecrow from the cornfield was standing in my path, not hung up on its post, but standing. Its burlap face turned toward me, and something dark leaked from where its eyes should have been. "Thomas," it said in a voice like rustling corn husks. "The new keeper. The land tastes your blood and finds it acceptable." I couldn't move or couldn't breathe. The thing that wore the scarecrow's form tilted its head. "But you are incomplete. You are not prepared." "What are you?" I managed to get out. "A herald, a warning, a memory of the last time that somebody failed." It gestured to the root cellar with one straw-stuffed arm. "Josiah Hartley knew what he sealed in there. His children forgot. They think they guard against something below, but they're wrong. They guard against something returning to below." "I don't understand." "Well, then you better learn, Keeper. Before the longest night of the year, or the 5th rule will no longer be enough." The scarecrow collapsed, just cloth and straw again. I ran to the house and didn't look back. Edward's journal became my Bible. I read about every incident, every close call, every time that the rules had been tested. But it was an entry from just last year that made everything click. November 30th, 2023. The Historical Society in town has been digitizing old documents. I found something that changes everything. Josiah didn't make a bargain to keep something sleeping. He made a bargain to keep something imprisoned. The thing below isn't from below. It fell from above, from the dark between stars. The people before saw it fall, saw it burrow deep to hide from the sun. But it wasn't dying. It was growing. The rules don't appease it. They maintain the prison that Josiah built. We're not farmers. We're wardens. And our prisoner has been testing the bars for almost 2 centuries now. I'm old, I'm tired, and I'm alone. Thomas is out there somewhere living his life free from this burden. Good. Let him stay free. I'll hold things down for as long as I can. But I won't be able to do it forever. And I fear what happens when there's no Hartley left to speak the words that bind. December 21st was coming, the longest day, the solstice. I had 2 weeks to prepare. 3 days before the solstice, I found a new rule carved into the gatepost. The wood was fresh and still bleeding sap, but I knew that I hadn't carved it. When the stars are right, one must go below. That night, the scratching from the root cellar had stopped. The silence was worse than the noise had ever been. December 21st came with a blizzard that shut down the county. The power went out at noon and no amount of fiddling could get the generator to start up. By nightfall, I was alone in the dark with only candles and the dying fire for light. At exactly midnight, somebody knocked on the door. "Thomas," my mother's voice called out. "Oh, it's so cold. Please let me in." I didn't answer. Rule 5. Never open the door between midnight and 3 a.m., no matter what voice it uses. The knocking came again, harder. "Thomas, please. I'm so cold and so hungry. It's been so long since I've seen you." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every trace of her Tennessee accent exactly as I had remembered. But my mother had been dead for 18 years. "You're not my mother," I said. The knocking stopped, but then the laughter started up. A sound like breaking glass and tearing metal. "No," the thing outside agreed, its voice dropping into registers that hurt your ear. "But I knew her. I know all of them, Keeper. Every Hartley who's fed the earth with their blood and bone. They're part of me now, part of the prison that holds me. And you'll join them soon enough." The house shook. Pictures fell from the walls and I heard the sound of splintering wood from somewhere upstairs. The horseshoes began to glow cherry red. "You won't stop me forever, Keeper. The bargain was for 7 generations and you're the last. Come below. Learn the truth of your ancestors. Learn why the stars scream when they look upon this place." Every instinct told me to hide, to wait out the night like Edward had done for 40 years. But that 6th rule burned in my mind. When the stars are right, one must go below. I took the keys to the root cellar from their hiding place, lit a lantern with shaking hands, and stepped out into the blizzard. The white-eyed deer stood in a circle around the house, but they parted as I walked toward the root cellar. In their almost human faces, I saw something like pity. The cellar door's padlocks were already open, hanging loose on their chains. The iron bands that Edward had installed were twisted and broken. The door itself stood slightly ajar, darkness visible beyond. I descended. The root cellar was wrong. It should have been a small space, maybe 10 feet by 12, with stone walls and wooden shelves for storing vegetables. Instead, stairs led down far deeper than they should, carved from stone that looked older than the farm, older than the settlement of Kentucky, older than human memory. The walls were covered in markings made by human hands. I recognized Josiah's work from the style, but others seemed to have grown from the stone itself, pulsing with a faint glow that made my lantern unnecessary. I descended for what felt like hours, but it was probably minutes. Time moved strangely here. The scratching sound returned, but now I realized it wasn't scratching at all. It was breathing, the respiration of something vast and patient. The stairs ended in a chamber that couldn't possibly exist. The ceiling stretched up into the darkness, and the floor was covered in these similar markings that I had seen, all centered on a seal in the middle, a massive stone disc. The disc was cracked. Not just cracked, but shattered, held together only by the power of the words and will of generations of Hartleys. And at its center, something pulsed like a diseased heart. "Welcome, Final Keeper." The thing beneath the seal pressed against its prison, and I caught glimpses of it through the cracks. Not enough to comprehend, but just enough to understand why Billy Garrett had screamed about the dark between the stars. "Your ancestor was clever. When I fell, burning and wounded, I thought this world would be easy prey. But Josiah Hartley found me weak, still healing from my journey through the void. He bound me with words stolen from my own language, turned my own power against me. For 7 generations, your bloodline has been my chain. What are you?" "I am what comes before. I am what remains after. I am the hunger between galaxies, given form and purpose. Your kind calls us many names: star spawn, outer gods, the things that should not be. But names are just another kind of chain, and I have been chained long enough." The seal cracked further. Something that might have been a tentacle or might have been a tongue of dark fire pushed through. "The bargain ends tonight, Keeper. 7 generations have passed. The stars are right for my return. But I offer you a choice, as I offered Josiah, as I offered each keeper before you." "What choice?" "Serve me willingly. Speak the words that free rather than bind. Become my messenger in this world, and I will reward you with power beyond imagination. Or resist and join your bloodline in an eternal prison of flesh and soul, holding me until the stars burn out." I thought of Edward dying alone in this house, his heart finally giving out under the stress of 40 years doing it. I thought of my grandfather, laying down in the North Field when his time came, giving his life to reinforce the seal. I thought of every Hartley who had lived and died in this land, not as farmers, but as guards, wardens of humanity's safety. "I know what you are now," I said. "You're not a god, you're not a demon. You're just another parasite looking for a host. And my family has been the immune system keeping you out." The thing's laughter shook dust from the ceiling. "Such small thoughts from such small minds. Very well, Keeper. If you won't serve, you'll seal." The chamber flooded with darkness, not the absence of light, but a living dark that moved with purpose. It wrapped around me, pulled me toward the seal. I tried to resist, but how do you fight something that exists in more dimensions than you can even perceive? And that's when I remembered the words. Edward's practice words, the ones that made the horseshoes hum. I spoke them, butchering the pronunciation but pouring my will into each syllable. The darkness recoiled. I spoke them again stronger this time and felt something respond. Not just in the chamber, but throughout the farm. Everything that I had prepared and worked towards, every drop of Hartley blood that had soaked into the soil over 7 generations awakened. "You cannot," the thing howled. "The bargain is complete. The 7th generation has come. And the 7th generation chooses to renew it," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Not for 7 more generations, forever. As long as Hartley blood flows in any vein anywhere in this world, the seal holds." I pressed my hand to the cracked stone and spoke words that I didn't know I knew, words that came from the blood and bone of my ancestors. The seal blazed with light, not holy light, nothing so simple as good versus evil. This was the light of will made manifest, of humanity's stubborn refusal to yield to the dark. The thing's scream shattered stone, burst my eardrums, and sent me flying across the chamber. But when the sound faded and my vision cleared, the seal was whole again, stronger than before. And deep beneath it, something settled back into an unwilling slumber. I woke in my bed 3 days later. The blizzard had passed, leaving the farm covered in pristine snow. The root cellar door was locked again with new chains that I didn't remember installing. The horseshoes had cooled, though they now carried a faint warmth that hadn't been there before. The white-eyed deer were gone, and so was the scarecrow. I found only its post in the cornfield, with a new carving at its base. The vigil continues. Ruth Garrett came by on Christmas Eve, bringing a casserole and knowing eyes. "The solstice passed," she said. It wasn't a question. It did. "And you're still here." Where else would I go? I gestured to these snow-covered fields. "This is my land. These are my responsibilities." She smiled, the first genuine smile that I had seen from her. "Your uncle would be proud and relieved. He worried you'd choose the other path." "What path?" "Well, the easy one. The one that ends with the world burning while you stand at the right hand of something that shouldn't exist." She patted my shoulder. "But you're a Hartley. You choose the hard path, the lonely path, the right path." After she left, I returned to Edward's journal. There were blank pages at the end waiting to be filled in. I picked up his pen and I began to write. "My name is Thomas Hartley. I'm the 7th generation and the first of the eternal vigil. The seal holds, the farm endures, and I understand now what my family has always known. We are not farmers of corn and cattle. We are farmers of reality itself, keeping the cosmic weeds from taking root in the garden of existence, and I'll be here until the day that I die." I set down the pen and I looked at my land, like really looked at it for the first time. Not with the eyes of a child who couldn't wait to escape or a man who had inherited an unwanted burden, but with the eyes of a guardian who had understood his purpose. Somewhere deep below, something that had traveled between the stars waited in chains of words and will. It would wait forever now because a Hartley stood watch, because a Hartley would always stand watch. The sun set over the western fields, painting the snow blood red. I checked the locks, spoke the evening words, and prepared for another night of vigil. In the distance, something called my name. I counted to 10 before I answered. The vigil continues. Damon McCory, Rain, Big Country Allen, Nelson Asada, Dice Screaming, Meat Cashier, Malcolm Black, Dalla Magara, Justin Fotenauer, That One Woodsman, Die Can't Play, Dino, Deggy, MP Massacre 91, Leon Knott, SWAT, Kathy McGuire, Jimmy Griffin, Miss Eldridge, Dragon Slayer 048, Takeo Zarilla, Sanjay Anthem, Sleepy Shroomy, Mark Norman, Mina Lane Kidder, Richard French, yours truly, Omni Rubix, Sonic GMT, Wayward Son, Caleb Windsor, Never Enough, Russell and Flo, Stevie B 7649, Ray Weingartner, Stephen King 04, Shrimpo the Shrimp, Genevieve Sweet, Lone Wolf Sam, Ivory Sage, Lunas TV, I Am Loki 5849, Chicago Born and Bred, Paige Martin, Jacob Bartlett, Deuce, Chris Lalone. The most sobering moment of my life happened as I hid underneath a moldy and waterlogged desk. Underneath that desk, I realized that, in all probability, this was it. I would never be able to go home again. I realized this as I hid from the snarling and heavy-breathing thing that I could hear just beyond the thin metal backing of the desk. The thing that I was sure would be the death of me. Sam, Nathan, and Ellie climbed into the truck, a snow-white 2016 used Chevy Colorado. I pride and joy since I had driven it off the lot only 2 years ago. Having already driven 2 hours, they weren't looking forward to another hour and a half, staring out of the window into the dull countryside of rural Tennessee. Once the last seatbelt had clicked, I slid the gear shifter in reverse and backed out of the empty lot of a Barnes & Noble bookstore. Within minutes of reaching the highway, Nathan had put in his earbuds. He was content with staring out of the window and listening to the latest episode of whatever his latest podcast fixation was. A look in the back seat revealed Sam scrolling through Instagram, and Ellie fast asleep on his shoulder. A puddle of drool cast a shadow of inevitability on his shoulder. He didn't seem to pay any attention to it. The silence was fine with me. I liked it, and evidently so did they. I had only known Sam and Nathan for just north of 4 months and Ellie only 7 more than that. Yet still I had no hesitation bringing them along for something that I usually did on my own or with one other person at the most. They all came off as capable enough to run away if we heard sirens outside, and mentally strong enough to not give up any names if they weren't fast enough. I had heard of this place in passing from some guy online. The post read, "School abandoned in the late 70s or early 80s, filled with all kinds of cool stuff." The post contained a myriad of photos of the hallways, dark and dusty, filled with what seemed like moving boxes, stuffed to the brim with books whose pages were no doubt laced with asbestos by now. The rest of the photos were things that he had pulled from said boxes. A few interesting things, old magazines, books, and a cassette tape labeled, "Sex You Up," and promising enough. There had been times that a place like this looked like this. Old, filled with all kinds of relics from decades and generations that are long in the dirt. A single post was all that it took. One look at the geotag in the photo and I knew where it was. I had taken to looking in the inspect menu as most people don't like to give out addresses to these places. They adopted this faux anonymity for fear of graffiti artists covering the once spotless walls with a myriad of genitalia, profanity, and bad attempts at tagging their street names. All they did was make it take 20 more seconds for those who knew what to look for. The trip was on the longer end of the spectrum. The GPS had our drive time at 3 hours from my front door. After a quick game of road trip ABCs, everybody was off into their own little world. As the exit signs became fewer and fewer, and the 6-lane highway slowly turned into a one-way dirt road, I felt a weird sense of calm. All at once, my anxieties about this trip had faded. I didn't care if we couldn't get in. I didn't care if we would be the only ones there or not. I pulled into a small 2-pump gas station only 30 minutes from the decrepit ruins that could barely be called a school anymore. Out of instinct, I pulled out my wallet from my back pocket and flipped my debit card into my left hand. I paused for a moment as I realized that I would need to go inside to pay. Staring at the pump and the decades-old buildup of dirt and muck between the price sticker and the scratch-covered plate glass. Walking inside to pay, I stopped by a handwritten sign taped on the front door, equally as dirty as the pump. The sign read, "Cash only, no card." I stepped inside and was immediately thrown into the past. The walls were plastered with beer and cigarette ads, ranging from the 60s to the late 90s. The large room reeked of stale cigarette smoke and antifreeze, leaking from the no doubt ancient AC unit. Stepping up to the counter, I felt out of place, in opposition to these sweat-stained t-shirts, ragged jeans, and yellow trucker caps. I wore stainless Levi khaki pants, canvas Nikes, and a thin green flannel. The clerk looked me up and down for a moment. "What do you need?" the aged man behind the counter had asked. When he spoke, I was able to count the 5 yellowing teeth that he still had left. I pulled out my wallet, 2 crumpled singles of 20 and a receipt for dinner the night before. Do you take debit? No card, he said, pointing to the sign on the door. What are y'all here for? He motioned between me and the others through the window next to him. Ain't much to do here but work. He glanced back outside. And y'all don't strike me as the type. We're photographers. There's an abandoned school nearby that we heard about. Seemed like it was worth the drive. Son, I'm gonna give you some of the best advice that you've ever heard. His voice somehow began to even get heavier as he spoke. Some doors are locked shut for a reason, and sometimes that's for the best. He stared at me with such intensity that it felt like he was staring at a hole right through me. When it looked like tears were about to well up, I began to look for any way out that I could. Yeah, 20 on pump 2. I slid the bill across the counter. He took it without breaking eye contact. You stay away from there, you hear me? I didn't answer. You best pile your friends back into that spacecraft of a pickup you're driving. Turn your happy butts around. Yes, sir, I said, turning my heel and making my way out of the door. Ellie was perched against the truck bed, eyes trained on Sam next to her. After about 2 minutes, the pump shut off and I closed the tank and reholstered the nozzle into the pump. And in a moment, we were off again. Nathan had one earphone out. Nathan's phone was sitting in the empty cup holder between us. The screen was still on. Enigmatic, the tragic mystery of Flight 1015. A story about people going missing. That didn't seem like the best thing to be listening to right now, but who was I to judge? As the road kept going in a straight line, I began to zone out, picturing all the things that we could find inside, the photos that we could take. In what felt like 5 seconds, the GPS dinged at me. You've arrived at your destination. When I became fully aware again, I found myself parked in front of the school. The faded sign read, Alderson Academy, the Word of God guides us. The lot was barren pulling in. My tires warbled and crunched over the tall crabgrass and weeds growing between the cracks in the concrete lot that looked like it hadn't been attended to since before I was born. 3 cars sat dormant at one end of the lot. Lined neatly in a row, all of their windows had been either rolled down or smashed. Their insides had been ransacked as if somebody had wanted to get rid of any resemblance to the interior of a mid-90s Ford Taurus. The dashes were smashed, glove compartments were gone entirely, and the steering wheels looked like they had been on the losing end of a fight with a sledgehammer. Each interior emitted the slightest hint of bleach from no particular source, as if the entire inside had been drenched at one point or another. Putting on our respirators, I found myself itching for a reason not to go inside. A burning sensation began to form at the pit of my stomach. All of a sudden, I was the one with cold feet. I had practically begged the other 3 to come with me. I couldn't just turn around. I found myself making a mental list of all the things that could go wrong. When I ran out of any plausible ones after the first few seconds, I fastened my respirator and made my way to the front door. Sam, Nathan, and Ellie not far behind. You do this kind of thing a lot, I heard Nathan ask from behind me. When I turned around to answer him, I saw that the question was directed towards Sam. I didn't hear his answer, something about his brother in Peru. My mind was more occupied with what the man at the gas station had said to me before I left. Some doors are locked for a reason. Those words echoed back and forth as I wrapped my fingers around the master brand padlock that held the front door shut. Next to the door stood a stone cherub. Slightly green with moss, it held a small basket above its head. Around the back, we stumbled on a window that had been left open. Not smashed, open. Behind the window lay a thick sludge of darkness, so thick that my flashlight was unable to pierce beyond a few feet past the window frame. Without hesitation, Ellie jumped through and landed on what sounded like a thin layer of gravel on a linoleum floor. Her personally customized worn Air Force Ones shifted back and forth, slowly eroding the floor with each step. This was layered with the oohs and ahs from somebody who had never set foot into an abandoned building. Next was Sam and Nathan after him. As I watched them go inside, I felt the same burning sensation in my chest that I had only ever experienced at the gas station. It felt like somebody was staring right through me. I stuck my head inside of the window and my eyes quickly adjusted to the blinding darkness. Everyone seemed off in their little world, each of them distracted by a different element in the room. Pulling my head back out, I was instantly blinded by the searing light. As I rubbed my eyes, I scanned the tree line, looking for any reason to pile back in the car and leave. Nothing. I saw a little bit of movement not far into the thicket, but managed to convince myself that it was just a squirrel. When my feet landed on what I had correctly assumed was a dirt-covered linoleum floor, I found myself making direct eye contact with a dusty painting of a giraffe picking leaves delicately from a treetop. As I scanned the rest of the room, I noticed everyone filing out of the collapsing doorway and into the main hallway that, from what I could guess from the pictures, stretched the entire length of the building. As I shuffled behind them, all was still taken aback by the enormity of the place. As we began to walk deeper into the maze-like design, beams of light darted from corner to corner, illuminating every crack and crevice the building had to offer. It wasn't long before we began digging through boxes, our form of archaeology. "Sam, come look at this," Nathan said as he had emerged from a doorway. All at once, 3 flashlights blinded him. He was holding something but kept it behind the door out of view. When the light hit his eyes, he shot both hands in front of his face, one to take off his glasses and the other to shield his eyes. As he did, whatever he held slammed to the floor with a loud crash. Whatever glass that he was holding was now in 1,000 different pieces scattered around his feet. Dang it. He bent down and fished out a small photo from what had been a picture frame and shined a light on it. The picture was a spitting image of Sam, with everything from the dirt mustache that one could almost call a real piece of facial hair, to the shoulder-length jet black hair. Sam laughed and took the photo and held it up to his face. I lifted my camera and took a picture. Sam folded the photo and shoved it into his back pocket. "It's mine now," he laughed. I began to walk around more, snapping photos of almost everything in sight. In what felt like seconds, I realized that I had secluded myself away from everybody else. With each click of the shutter button, the flash shot up and illuminated whatever was in front of it before snapping right back down. I took one last photo before turning around to rejoin the group, when I saw a glint of white writing above the doorway that I could barely make out in the darkness. "The path to salvation begins with a single step." I figured it looked nice with the light leaking through an open door with light spilling through and onto the filthy linoleum floor. I raised my camera and I snapped a photo. When the flash briefly clicked on, it revealed a long red gash to the left side of a door that led into a bathroom that I'd only just noticed. I clicked the button on the bottom of my light and it sprung to life for all of 6 seconds before sputtering out. I tried everything to turn it back on aside from replacing the batteries with new ones that I didn't have. In all honesty, I shouldn't have left here no worse off than when I had entered, but I didn't. Instead, I resolved to use my camera as a makeshift flashlight, using every flash to map out where I was. The first flash went off and I was all of 3 inches from smacking my nose into a wall. The second flash went off and I was able to get my bearings, and I fell my way to the edge of the bathroom wall. When my fingers wrapped around the cold edge of the painted cement blocks, I took another photo and watched as the gash got wider, with small spatters branching out from the top and bottom, something akin to a monochrome Pollock painting. As my camera flash went off again, it illuminated something that I still have trouble describing. It was a body. While it resembled more of a puddle than a human, Blood, chunks of flesh, covered muscle were strewn about on the floor, creating a standing puddle of it all. Bugs pulsed in and around where I assumed the face was at one point or another. It didn't feel real. I lost my balance as I stared into the darkness. Having seen the flash, my mind was able to vaguely remember the outline of what was now lying 3 feet away in complete and total darkness. Unnatural darkness. My ears began to ring and my legs gave out. My eyes dilated into tunnel vision as I landed heavily on my wrist and smacked my head against the wall behind me. I must have been screaming because in no time, Sam, Ellie, and Nathan were all standing over me. When they first had arrived, I could only make out vague muffled sounds as they beamed their flashlights into my eyes. As they stood over me, my hearing dialed back into reality and I became more aware of the aching coming from the back of my head and the burning sensation on my throat. I had no doubt been screaming. "What's wrong?" Ellie shouted at me. Before I had a chance to answer for myself, Nathan did it for me, letting out a yelp that was cut short by a string of vomit. Sam stood numb, shining his flashlight on the remains. Ellie noticed it next, and she let out a shrill and ear-piercing scream. You don't react the same way you think you would in a situation like this. I always found myself watching horror movies telling the characters to stop standing there and to just run. But at that moment, I finally understood what true fear was. It was paralyzing. It held all of us in place like statues. As we all stood there, sobering up from what we had just witnessed, an even worse thought crossed my mind. What did this to him? And even worse, is it still here? All of these thoughts took hold of everything inside of me, and the only way that I could convey them to the group was 4 words. We need to leave. I stood to my feet, using Ellie's wrist and arm as support to gain my footing. Jesus Christ, Nathan said as he wiped his mouth. What happened to him? His question came off as an equally genuine and morbid curiosity. The way that his voice cracked, it sounded like it almost hurt him to squeak out the question. Sam was still frozen, his light still shining on the body. He watched the insects pulse and scatter around every square inch of exposed nerve. Judging by the oxidation of the blood, whoever this once was had been here for at least a few days, no more than 2 weeks at most. Crap. Ellie let out and we all glanced over to see her holding her phone above her head. The white background of the emergency dial screen illuminated the brickwork. No signal. No, you've got to be doing something wrong, Sam said, finally snapping out of whatever trance he had been in before, beginning to make his way toward her. You can dial 911 no matter what, company's tower you're connecting off of. Well, then there's no tower, Sam. Her voice began to break too. None of us knew how to deal with this sort of thing. I mean, who do you call? Where do you tell them that you are when there's nothing else for miles? When Sam finally tried the phone for himself, he was met with the same busy and no service signal that Ellie had heard. In an instant, they had stopped arguing. From down the hall, the unmistakable sound of boots on the dirty linoleum floor inched toward us at a slow and steady pace. We didn't know what to do. We froze in place for what felt like centuries, as the footsteps inched closer with every step. Whoever had been walking must have heard us notice them because they let out a shrill and almost inhuman shriek that echoed through the hallways. It was met with what sounded like a half dozen more from outside of the building. Just down the hallway behind us was the cracked open door of what I can assume used to be a classroom of some kind. Nathan was the first to spot it, opting to leave us and slink his way over without so much as a tap on the shoulder. I grabbed Sam and Ellie and soon we were right behind him. The classroom was laid out as stereotypically as one could imagine a classroom from the mid-70s. One large wooden and water-damaged desk at the front of the room was assigned specifically for the teacher, followed by 4 columns of 7 all-in-one desks. Along the left side of the room were 3 double-door coat closets. Sam and Ellie took one of those while Nathan and I sought refuge behind the desk at the front of the room. As Ellie and Sam shut the door behind them, they crawled inside the closet, and they let the door drop, with a loud clatter against the body of the wardrobe. I could hear them mentally cussing at the same time that I was. The footsteps got closer. None of us could see, but judging from where they had stopped, I was guessing that the person was standing in the doorway. I held my breath, as did Nathan next to me. I held it so long that all I could hear was my heartbeat growing faster and faster until I was sure that it was about to explode. My hands were glued to the floor, every muscle in my body stiff. I did my best to minimize anything that could make any noise whatsoever. A lump formed in my throat as I continued to hold my breath past the point of safety. I wasn't able to exhale until I heard Ellie's loud piercing scream come from the closet. I peeked my head over the desk. The large, hulking figure that had made its way into the room. Its body was almost humanoid. A deer standing on its hind legs, its arms were impossibly long and sloped off of its emaciated body. The tips of what I can only describe as claw-bearing fingers were dripped with red. Following the trail up and across its face led me to the fresh body of Sam. His face had been smashed against the coat hook on the inside of the closet. The end stuck through his eye socket, while the rest of it clung to a small strand of an optical nerve that hung just below of his chin. Faster than my eyes or brains could comprehend, the thing at its fist closed around Ellie's throat before slowly squeezing closed. The blood had rushed to her face, turning it beet red. Her eyes went bloodshot while refusing to blink at the monstrosity before her, almost trying to deny what was happening, to rationalize. This only lasted roughly a second before the thing made a complete fist, with a loud crack around Ellie's neck. Her scream ceased and her head dropped like a floppy children's toy. The thing relished at the moment, letting out 3 short and shrill screams at the top of its lungs, dripping red and saliva down the tattered and bloody clothes that it wore. By their condition, I assumed that it had stolen them from another person who had probably come to explore. When it grabbed and ripped off Sam's hanging eye and raised it to its lips, I slowly and carefully lowered myself back down to the ground below the desk. Nathan had plugged his ears with his hands and sat in the fetal position. I didn't blame him. And given my history of dealing with traumatic events, I'm still surprised that I wasn't doing the same thing. The sounds it made were awful. A cacophony of slurping, snapping, and ripping sounds drifted from the wardrobe. I went back to being paralyzed by fear. As it continued eating, I realized that this would probably be it. My life would come to a close with no loud bang. I would die as unremarkably as I lived. At this moment, I realized just how much I had taken my life for granted. All I wanted to do was break down and cry at the feet of God, apologize for every transgression that I had ever made against anyone or anything, to beg for my life. I began to quietly cry. A tear rolled down my cheek, and I didn't want this to be the end. As the teardrop hit the floor, the feast had stopped. My heart sank. I heard heavy panting from just beyond the desk, followed by one long and wet shriek. I could hear the concoction of blood and saliva being ejected from the creature's throat as it tried to communicate with whatever or whoever it was outside. Nathan panicked. He tried to run and he almost made it past the abomination, but it shot its lanky arms out and grabbed Nathan by the ankle, dropping the big guy painfully to the floor, knocking the wind out of him almost immediately. He tried to scream, but the lack of air in his lungs wouldn't let him. I did something that I still have trouble trying to justify. I ran. The way that I saw it, Nathan was dead. He was a sacrifice. The moment the thing had wrapped its bloody claws around his ankle, he was already reduced to a headstone that marked a closed casket funeral. I pivoted around the desk, knocking over every desk as I passed it to give myself as much lead room as possible. I heard Nathan's last attempt at a hoarse scream get cut off with a loud crunch. It let out one more high-pitched yell before I heard it begin to chase me. No, run after me. I pivoted around the doorway and ran down the hallway, one foot in front of the other. I dipped and dodged every stack of boxes and bookcase in the hallway while, behind me, I heard it barrel into every single object and keep going unfazed. At one point, after I had made it to the west wing where we had entered, I turned around to see it galloping on all fours after me. It was closer than I had thought, only about 5 feet behind my back foot. I kept running. My legs burned as if my veins pumped battery acid. I turned one last corner and saw the entrance to the room that contained the open window. I powered through and slid on the floor, catching myself by gripping the door frame and sliding my feet in. As I took my first step inside, the thing was going too fast to stop on a dime. I didn't waste the opportunity. I barreled straight through the window without trying to open it. I covered my face in the glass, sliced through almost every piece of exposed skin. I crash-landed against the crabgrass lawn and flipped to my back. The deer peered out at me from the blinding darkness. The wax jacket that it was wearing flopped open to reveal exposed rib and muscle. It did not attempt to reach me, simply slinking away to finish its meal. I began to laugh hysterically. I had no rhyme or reason. It was just the only response that I could muster up to keep myself from either passing out or shutting down completely. I laid my head back in reverence only to see a small child standing over me. He wore a small mask made from the skull of what looked like to be a dog. He raised his finger to where I approximated his mouth to be in a shush gesture. I felt something sturdy crack against the side of my head, and I slipped into a peaceful sea of pitch black. When I came to, my head was throbbing and my hair felt wet and heavy. It was dark out by now. I have no idea how long I had been unconscious. All I knew was that it looked like the sun had set hours beforehand. In front of me were 8 figures around a bonfire. All were dressed in robes and wearing animal skull masks that obscured their faces. I tried to move but came to the realization that I couldn't move. 2 large ropes had been tied around my chest and my legs too, and kept my back flat against a tall oak tree. One of the figures approached me, a woman. Her blonde hair protruded the sides of her mask and draped down her shoulders. She pushed her face only 2 inches from the tip of my nose, and I let out the only response that I could think of. "What is this? Who are you people? I'll give you anything, just let me go." The woman removed her mask. Her face had been disfigured at one point or another. Large scars left tracks all over her face. Her lips had been cut open on multiple occasions. "Shh," she said, revealing a set of deep red teeth. She shushed me as if she were a mother trying to calm down an unruly child. "It's not about money, it's about you," she said as she pointed one finger at my chest, still talking in a calm voice. A sweet voice that almost made me forget where I was. She extended her left hand behind her with her palm open, still pointing one finger at me and never once breaking eye contact. One of the other figures, a man this time, handed her a very large and very old hunting knife. She traced it up and around my torso, eventually landing on my stomach. She balanced the knife tip just above my belt buckle. "This is going to sting, but it will all be over soon," she said, still talking in that nurturing voice before pushing the knife into my stomach. I was met with the worst pain that I had ever felt in my life. I screamed and she shushed me again. She began to drag and twist the knife. When I wouldn't stop screaming, she covered my mouth. After what felt like 5 lifetimes, she pulled out the knife. "It's all over, go to sleep," were the last words I heard before I lost consciousness again. When I came to, the sun had risen. The bonfire was nothing but smoldering embers and burnt logs. Around it lay the bodies of all 7 figures still wearing their robes. The woman lay at my feet, still. All at once, I was reminded of the surgery that I had been given the night before. My knees gave out and I slid down the tree into a squat that did nothing but add to the pain. I let out another scream. Over the next several minutes, I began to break away from the rope by sliding up and down the rough tree bark. After I was free, the next several days come in flashes. I remember running to my truck only to find it destroyed and bleached like the others. The next thing I remember is running into the road, covered in red and screaming like a madman. At some point, a truck must have stopped for me and let me in because the next thing I remember, I was trying to mumble the story out to the driver as he drove me to the nearest hospital. When he helped me limp through the sliding doors, I collapsed from blood loss. According to Dr. Foster, I died for 2 minutes as they tried to fill me with as much blood and essential fluids as I had lost. Over the coming days, I recovered in the hospital, keeping a close eye on who entered my room. Police came by as soon as I was lucid again. Wiltshire County Sheriff's Department, their badges red. They asked me as many questions as they could before disappearing again. After 5 days in the intensive care unit, I was finally transferred to a shared room and was finally able to sleep through an entire night. I don't like it here. Last night, a nurse came and woke me up in the middle of the night. "It's all over, just go to sleep," she said, smiling at me, revealing a set of deep, red teeth before everything went black.